Yvonne Lohr dreamed of discovering the world, feeling free, exploring ancient lands, and sharing joyful selfies from the farthest corners of the earth. Then, on a bright morning in Egypt, everything changed. After a series of frantic text messages, there was only silence. This is the story of Yvonne Lohr, a daughter, a sister, a traveler. A group of tourists, including her, goes missing under shocking circumstances need unraveling a mysterious plot far from home. Yvonne Lohr was born on May 11, 2000 in Colombia. She is the eldest daughter of Mary Sanchez and Diego Lohr, and grew up with her younger brother, with whom she shared a strong and inseparable bond. Although little is known about her early life, it is clear that, as an adult, Yvonne made a courageous choice. She moved to Europe in hopes of a brighter future. She settled in Barcelona, Spain. Her friends and family described her as strong, very sensitive, and extremely loyal. She cared deeply for her loved ones and supported her family in Colombia by working multiple jobs, sometimes holding as many as 3 at the same time. Although her exact positions in Spain are not clear, her determination to support others was unquestionable. Yvonne loved adventure, and her social media accounts were filled with photos from her travels, showcasing her independence and lively spirit. In April 2025, Yvonne organized a trip that would turn out to be her most unforgettable adventure, and also her last. This time, she wouldn't be traveling alone. Her close friend Stefania Bedoya, a Colombian woman 5 years older than her, would be joining her. Stefania became well known in Colombia after winning the title of Miss Antioquia in the 2023-2024 pageant. She had been trained as a flight attendant and was currently working in digital marketing and modeling. Yvonne Lohr and her close friend Stefania Bedoya had planned the trip in advance with great anticipation. Stefania arrived in Barcelona on April 15th. After spending a few days together, they flew to Cairo, Egypt, on April 24th. Why Egypt? The choice of destination was intentional. Both had tickets to Samna, one of the region's largest electronic music festivals, which was scheduled for April 25th and 26th. For Yvonne, the timing couldn't have been better. She was about to celebrate her 25th birthday in the most exciting way she could imagine, dancing under the stars in a new country. The festival began with happiness music, dancing, laughter, and meeting new people. That was when they met Jessie Escobar. Jessie introduced herself at the event and was accompanied by 2 men, whom she also introduced as her friends. The 5 seemed to connect naturally and easily. Soon, the girls and their new friends began spending more and more time together. Yvonne, always open and spontaneous, shared stories about their night on Instagram. In her videos from Friday night, April 25th, she appeared radiant and joyful, surrounded by vibrant lights and lively energy. By that point, the girls trusted Jessie enough that when she asked for the address of their hotel, they gave it to her. Jessie told them she would pick them up on April 27th at 9 a.m. to take them to another party. Everything changed on the morning of April 27th. At about 11:04 a.m., Yvonne started sending urgent messages to her family. But these weren't her usual cheerful updates, they were warnings. She wrote that someone was trying to hurt them and wanted to take them away by force. She shared her live location and urgently asked for help. In another message, she pleaded for the police to get involved. She said there were men outside their room and more cars were arriving. Every word was filled with panic. Despite her distress, Yvonne quickly contacted a friend in Spain. This time, she spoke openly and without hesitation. She said clearly, "If anything happens to me, I hold a woman on social media named Mescor1020 responsible." She sent a screenshot of the profile. Investigators later confirmed what the message suggested. Mescor 2020 was Jessie, the woman they had met at the festival. Then everything went silent. Yvonne stopped answering messages. Her phone was turned off, and her family never heard from her again. As more time passed without any news from Yvonne after her last message, her family became increasingly worried. One call after another went unanswered. What frightened them even more was that Stefania had also gone silent. 2 days passed. On April 29th, there was finally a small update. The family managed to get in touch with a woman named Natalia, who knew both parties. Natalia confirmed that Stefania was alive and staying at a hotel. This brought relief, but it was only temporary. Stefania didn't contact Yvonne's family directly until the following day, April 30th. Her words turned their world upside down. Yvonne was in intensive care and in a coma. There was no explanation or further details, just this stark, simple fact. Yvonne's parents were shocked by how calm Stefania sounded. No one seemed panicked. Everything remained calm, and no one hurried to explain things to them. This wasn't how a close friend would react, especially not someone who had traveled around the world with her. But the odd events continued. For several days, Stefania would not reveal which hospital it was. No location was shared, no photos were uploaded, and no updates were provided. The family felt isolated by distance and language barriers, unable to get help or clear information as time quickly slipped away. Yvonne's family began searching frantically. They contacted all the hospitals, clinics, and emergency rooms in Cairo. After many attempts and several formal requests, they finally received confirmation that Yvonne was in a public hospital. Her condition was very serious. She had several broken bones and needed a ventilator to help her breathe. The doctors said that her brain activity and vital signs were almost undetectable. When faced with something unimaginable, her family did everything they could. They started a fundraising campaign to collect donations for Mary, Yvonne's mother, so she could travel to Egypt and support her daughter. The response was incredible, coming from friends, strangers, Colombians, and compassionate people worldwide. Thanks to the generous donations, Mary was able to quickly book a flight, hurrying toward a reunion she had never expected to happen in this way. There was still a glimmer of hope, the chance to move Yvonne to Spain for specialized treatment, and the thought that she might survive after all. But that hope quickly faded. Yvonne passed away on May 4th, 2025, after spending 8 days in a coma. Her injuries were too severe, and the trauma was too great for her body to recover. Her family was heartbroken and overwhelmed, but they couldn't grieve not yet. They wanted to know the truth. They began urging the governments of Egypt and Colombia to conduct a prompt and transparent investigation. The family wanted to understand what had happened in the last hours of their daughter's life. The messages Yvonne sent before disappearing were soon discovered, revealing unsettling information. In one message, Yvonne warned that the men she was with claimed to be producers and promised to make her a star in the music industry. This was not true. Her family also revealed that these men were only known by their nicknames, El Serbio and El Doctor. Then, something unexpected happened. I had a conversation with Stefania. Stefania stated that Yvonne had fallen from a significant height when she was not there. But that was only the beginning of a series of contradictions. Over time, Stefania's account of what happened started to change. At first, the differences were subtle, but they gradually became more noticeable. With each new version, there were more questions than answers. Egyptian authorities said they had started an investigation. They stated that Stefania had been questioned and that attempts were being made to find Jesse and the two unidentified men. However, there were still no tangible outcomes, no arrests, no clues, and no resolution. Yvonne's family looked on in shock as the investigation began to lose momentum. They publicly accused both the Egyptian authorities and the Colombian consulate of negligence, making their claims widely known on both continents. From the beginning, they encountered indifference, delays, and a lack of support. Time was running out. The investigation was progressing too slowly. Meanwhile, they faced another difficult challenge. Yvonne's body was still in Egypt. The family didn't have enough money to bring her home, so they appealed to the public for help once again. A second fundraising campaign was launched, not only to seek justice, but also to give people the opportunity to say goodbye. As the days passed without any answers, Yvonne's family and friends were overwhelmed by a harsh truth. Those responsible for explaining what happened either remained silent or, even more troubling, continued to give conflicting accounts. Her loved ones reached out to the public as a last resort. They launched a widespread campaign on social media and in the news, not to assign blame, but to ensure that no other case would go unnoticed. They wanted to know the truth. They needed to know why Yvonne died and who was with her when it happened. On Tuesday, May 6th, a powerful new voice joined the fight for justice. Angie Giraldo, a close friend of Yvonne's, posted a 5-minute video that quickly went viral on the internet. She pointed out troubling contradictions in Stefania's earlier statements and also presented important new evidence. Angie's message was not only one of grief, but also a plea for clarity, truth, and for the world to reflect on Yvonne's final moments. The video spread rapidly on social media, sparking renewed public outrage and stronger calls for a thorough investigation. Angie explained her case clearly, providing screenshots, photos, and video clips. She said these were first posted by Stefania on social media, but were later deleted for unknown reasons. Luckily, those posts were saved. This material provides a more complete view, showing parts of the girls' trip and their interactions following the incident that left Yvonne fighting for her life. The findings contradicted the official accounts. They raised questions about the timeline, the people involved, and the overall story that was being presented. Based on the evidence Angie gathered and presented, Stefania and Jessie were the two women most involved in the situation. Neither of them was able to give a clear or consistent explanation of what happened. Both their public and private statements were inconsistent, often containing gaps and contradictions. Neither woman could provide a clear timeline, explain how Yvonne was injured, or give a logical account of events from beginning to end. Instead of providing clarity, their statements only created more confusion. As a result, confusion increased, suspicion intensified, and people around the world began paying closer attention. Stefania herself exhibited some of the most troubling inconsistencies. Angie included social media posts that Stefania had shared after the incident, and these posts appeared to be completely out of touch with reality. At one point, Stefania casually mentioned to a friend that she planned to eat at a luxury restaurant in Cairo, even though, at that same time, Yvonne was in the hospital in critical condition, fighting for her life. Despite everything, Stefania seemed unconcerned. The tone of her messages angered people, who wondered why she was not showing any sadness, urgency, or compassion. As these details came to light, more people began to doubt Stefania's involvement and to wonder if she had been completely honest. Stefania's actions were concerning, but Jessie's reaction was equally troubling, urgently seeking answers. Yvonne's family reached out to Jessie personally, hoping she could provide a clear explanation, something that would bring them peace, or at least help them understand. Instead, they received unclear answers, evasive voice messages, and even more conflicting statements. Jessie never provided a specific timeline. She spoke vaguely and did not seem concerned. Her account did not clarify or explain what actually happened that night. Her hesitation led people to become more distrustful and increasingly believe that important information was being withheld. In another leaked conversation, Stefania was overheard advising someone to remain calm and to follow all instructions. She referred to what happened to Yvonne merely as a difficult situation, without providing any details or showing any concern. To Yvonne's loved ones, these reactions did not indicate fear or trauma, but rather a sense of detachment, which only made them more suspicious. Let's remember that Stefania initially told the family that Yvonne had fallen from a high place. She claimed that she was not present during the incident and only learned about it afterwards. However, there were significant gaps in her account. She could not specify where the fall had taken place, when it had happened, or how Yvonne had been discovered. Her unclear story was already falling apart, and as more evidence emerged, her silence seemed less like confusion and more like she was hiding something. In a video that Stefania later deleted from social media, she said she was leaving a hotel in Cairo because she believed that a human trafficking ring was operating there. She claimed that she had been rescued and was now receiving threats, although she showed no visible injuries. Later, she gave a completely different version of what had happened. In this new statement, Stefania confirmed that she was with Yvonne when everything occurred. She mentioned both of them. As they were walking down the street, Jessie and two unidentified men were behind them. Stefania said that Yvonne began to panic and showed obvious signs of anxiety. Stefania tried to calm her down, but then, according to Stefania, Yvonne went ahead on her own to look for a safe place. Stefania said she took a taxi to try to catch up, but when she reached the spot where she expected to find Yvonne was no longer there. She said that was the moment when everything fell apart. Once again, nothing matched up. The timeline was unclear, and the locations were not specified. To make things even more confusing, Stefania later reported that Yvonne had been found with several broken bones. All of her belongings were still with her except for her passport, which was missing. Another warning sign, another unanswered question. Stefania said she felt completely broken, both emotionally and physically, as she tried to express how devastated she was. However, it was already too late to change what had happened. When those videos were released, social media erupted with activity. People began investigating the backgrounds of both Stefania and Jessie. Rumors circulated about Jessie. Some people accused her of being involved with human trafficking networks, while others claimed she had lived and worked in countries such as Germany and Turkey, specifically mentioning Ankara. Additionally, there were allegations that she had appeared on escort websites. At the same time, Stefania's name resurfaced in reports about her disagreements with Colombian brands, lingering issues from her participation in beauty pageants, and controversies within the modeling industry. Although none of these allegations were ever officially confirmed, rumors and speculation spread widely. As online pressure increased, both women made their social media profiles private, effectively bringing the case to a standstill. To this day, Yvonne's family has not received any clear or official updates from the Egyptian authorities or any government agency. No official communication has been made. This goes beyond negligence. It is outright abandonment. Many international reports warn that Egypt is a high-risk destination for women traveling alone. There are serious and increasing dangers, such as widespread gender-based violence and a largely hidden trafficking crisis. Refugees and migrants, particularly women, are vulnerable to exploitation. Yvonne, a Colombian woman far from home, found herself trapped in this dangerous situation. In Colombia, Yvonne's friends and family continue their fight. Their fundraiser is still ongoing. Although they have raised a substantial amount, it is still not enough to cover the significant expenses caused by this tragedy. Her family suffers from unbearable pain not knowing what happened to her in her final moments. Why do the people who were with her keep changing their stories? And why is no one, including the authorities, willing to tell the whole truth? This is one of the most unsettling cases we've discussed. A young woman died while overseas, and her friends either cannot or will not explain how it happened. The authorities are ignoring the situation. Governments remain silent, and life continues as usual. But her family cannot move on. They deserve honesty and clarity, not just rumors or conflicting information. They have a right to know the truth. They deserve justice in Yvonne Lore's case.
Zuzu Verk was born on April 22, 1995, in Keller, Texas. She grew up in a warm and loving family alongside her parents, Glenn Verk and Lori, and her older brother, Miles. Her brother described her as the brightest light in their lives. Zuzu attended Timber Creek High School and, after graduating, moved to Alpine, Texas, to study at the local university. She chose to major in conservation biology, driven by her passion for protecting the planet's wild spaces and creatures. Her academic achievements were impressive. She had recently made the Dean's List and was in the process of transferring to Texas University for her senior year. She was not only a dedicated student but also ambitious, idealistic, and focused on her goals. Her love for nature influenced her vision for the future. After college, she dreamed of living in Japan, where she could combine her passion for travel with her environmental advocacy. While in Alpine, she became involved with Robert Fabian, a young man 4 years her senior. At first, the relationship was based solely on attraction, but gradually became more complicated. Robert's charm attracted Zuzu, but her family, particularly her mother Lori and brother Miles, had some concerns about him. Lori viewed Robert as self-centered and dismissive, while Miles felt he was controlling and worried that he didn't support Zuzu's ambitions, particularly her desire to leave Alpine and pursue her dreams. Zuzu herself had similar worries. While she remained in the relationship, she confided in her mother that she couldn't envision a future with Robert. It felt more like a relationship of convenience than one based on genuine connection. Despite this, she remains kind and hopeful, reflecting her personality as she prepares to inform Robert about her transfer and her next choice. The last conversation Lori had with Zuzu was on October 10, 2016. Zuzu was excited to share that she was transferring to Texas University and ending her relationship with Robert. He had planned to take her to a movie the following night. Lori had no idea that this would be the last time she would ever hear her daughter's voice. As days went by without any word from Zuzu, worry turned into panic. Zuzu was known for always responding to messages, so her silence was unusual. Her parents, deeply concerned, started contacting everyone they knew who might have seen her. When Lori reached out to Robert, he said he hadn't seen Zuzu and mentioned that he was giving her some space. On October 14, 2016, Zuzu was officially reported missing. A massive search effort began, involving local authorities, state officials, and hundreds of volunteers. Helicopters flew over the desert, horseback riders searched difficult trails, and search teams extended their efforts hundreds of miles, even into Mexico. Flyers were distributed throughout the town, and a $100,000 reward was offered in hopes of finding Zuzu. However, hopes began to fade over time. The investigation began to focus on Robert Fabian. He told detectives that on the evening of October 11th, he and Zuzu had dinner at his apartment. He claimed that their dinner took a negative turn when he mentioned an ex-girlfriend, prompting Zuzu to leave in the early morning hours. He stated that he called her later but decided to stop trying to reach her when she didn't respond. This account raised suspicions with the police. A key witness was John Franco, a neighbor who resides downstairs from Robert. John reported seeing Zuzu enter Robert's apartment the night she disappeared. He could hear familiar sounds coming from Robert's apartment, such as chatter and laughter, but there was one strange moment. He heard Robert shout, "Shut up," breaking the usual atmosphere. Later, around 4 a.m., John saw Robert leaving the apartment alone, while Zuzu's car remained parked outside. John also recalled hearing what he thought were arguments and odd thuds from above, details that would later prove crucial. When investigators confronted Robert with this new information, his story changed. He now claimed that after the argument about the ex-girlfriend, he had left to drive to Dairy Queen to think things over. He said that when he returned, Zuzu was still there but left shortly after. This inconsistency raised enough suspicion for the detectives to request a search of Robert's apartment, to which he agreed. Inside, they found disturbing evidence. The bed was completely stripped of linens, and items like the mattress pad, clothes, and sheets had a strong smell of bleach. This painted a troubling picture. Investigators began to suspect that Zuzu's disappearance might be more complicated than they had initially thought. As the investigation expanded, a notable friend of Robert's, Chris Estrada, came to the group's attention. Their friendship dated back to high school, and this closeness made Chris a subject of scrutiny. Concerns grew after Chris appeared on national television on December 6, 2016, during an episode of Crime Watch Daily. Viewers and authorities noted his rigid posture, awkward mannerisms, and forced expressions. Phone records showed that Robert had called Chris at 3:15 a.m. on October 12, the same morning Zuzu went missing. During the investigation, Chris revealed that Robert had requested to borrow his credit card the day before, claiming to need it to buy plastic tarps for a painting project. This explanation raised suspicions. Why would anyone need painting supplies late at night? Investigators found the reasoning questionable and the timing suspicious. Another important witness, Brittany, told investigators that Chris had arrived at her apartment around midnight on October 13, appearing shaken. He looked pale and anxious, as if he had witnessed something disturbing. When she asked what was wrong, Chris allegedly replied, "Don't interfere." Despite these troubling signs, the case hit a dead end. All the evidence was circumstantial. There was no body and no concrete proof linking Robert to any crime. Zuzu's family, feeling devastated and desperate for answers, held press conferences urging Robert to come forward and help, but he remained silent. Weeks turned into months. However, on February 3, 2017, 3 months after Zuzu went missing, everything changed. While patrolling a remote area of Brewster County near Alpine, the police noticed something unusual, a disturbed patch of soil. As they approached, they saw plastic sticking out of the dirt, along with a blue sock and a piece of dark fabric. They immediately alerted the authorities. When investigators arrived and began to dig, their worst fears were realized. Inside a shallow grave, wrapped in a plastic painter's drop cloth, lay the body of Zuzu. DNA tests later confirmed her identity. Zuzu, a vibrant young woman with dreams of studying at Texas University, wanting to live in Japan, and who loved the stars and the earth, had finally been found. The plastic wrap used to conceal her body matched the type Robert had purchased at Dollar General using Chris's borrowed credit card. This was the crucial evidence. Within 24 hours of the discovery, Robert was arrested and charged with evidence tampering and abuse of a corpse. 2 days later, Chris was also arrested in Phoenix, Arizona, facing similar charges. The charges against Robert were soon upgraded to murder. In April 2018, Chris agreed to plead guilty and testify against his best friend, Robert, and he did not deny his role in the crime. In contrast, Robert maintained his innocence, pleading not guilty. His defense attorney argued that there was no direct physical evidence, no fingerprints or DNA linking Robert to the murder. However, prosecutors pointed to Robert's suspicious behavior after Zuzu's disappearance. He bleached sheets, changed his story multiple times, and showed an unusual interest in the investigation. A coworker even testified that Robert, who was once calm, became erratic after Zuzu went missing, frequently inquiring about law enforcement activities. This behavior indicated not a concerned boyfriend, but someone anxious about their own involvement in a crime. The trial was painful for Zuzu's family but also brought some closure as the grim truth emerged. Zuzu's memory would endure, cherished by her family as a vibrant young woman with dreams and aspirations that were tragically cut short. On the third day of the trial, silence fell over the courtroom as Chris took the witness stand and made a confession that would alter the case's direction. He described a night marked by desperation, phone calls, and a secret that was never meant to be shared. Chris testified that Robert called him late at night, insisting it was a life-or-death situation. During their conversation, Robert recounted a distressing evening with Zuzu that turned violent. According to Chris, an argument led to Robert strangling Zuzu. As she gasped for air and eventually stopped breathing, Robert panicked. Chris claimed that Robert attempted to perform CPR, but it was too late. Following this incident, Chris testified that Robert entered survival mode, attempting to conceal his actions. Claims that Zuzu's death was an accident seem disingenuous. Strangulation is a deliberate and conscious act, not a knee-jerk reaction. Chris confessed that Robert repeatedly called him, pleading for help in disposing of Zuzu's body. At one point, Robert even showed up at Chris's home in Alpine, begging for help and urging him not to go to the police. Although Chris claimed he refused to assist Robert, he admitted that he did not report what he knew, a decision that would haunt the investigation. While he was not physically involved in Zuzu's death, his silence prolonged the suffering of her family and hindered the pursuit of justice. Whether motivated by fear, loyalty, or moral indecision, Chris chose silence over honesty, leaving Zuzu's family in the dark for an extended period. In an unexpected turn of events, a new witness took the stand in the courtroom. Roy Roman, who once shared a cell with Robert at Brewster County Jail, testified that Robert had privately admitted to killing Zuzu. He claimed Robert was motivated by Zuzu's discovery of secrets he wanted to keep hidden. Specifically, she had learned about a potential romantic involvement between him and Chris, and she threatened to expose it. Fearing this revelation, Roy stated that Robert decided to silence Zuzu permanently. Roy described Robert as distraught in his cell, repeatedly saying that he hadn't meant to do that. On May 8, 2019, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Robert Fabian was found guilty on all counts and received a life sentence in prison, along with an additional 29 years for tampering with evidence. Chris Estrada, who had earlier accepted a plea deal and testified against Robert, was sentenced to 42 months in prison and fined for tampering with evidence and evading law enforcement. While Zuzu's family felt a sense of justice from the verdict, it did not bring them peace. Their beloved daughter was gone forever, and nothing could change that. In the midst of their grief, they received a painful reminder of what could have been, a letter from Texas University confirming Zuzu's acceptance into a program she had worked tirelessly to join. It was her dream, but tragically, she would never live to experience it. To honor Zuzu, the university renamed its amphitheater to Zuzu's Place and established a scholarship in natural resource management in her name, celebrating her dedication to protecting the natural world. However, the emotional scars from Zuzu's murder remain profound. Her brother, Miles, thought of her often and cherished small memories, like her washing dishes or her goodnight wishes, which now served as sweet but wistful reminders of the times they had together. Zuzu's family, although heartbroken, remains strong and is incredibly grateful for the ongoing support from the Alpine community. They acknowledged that without this support, they might not have survived the darkest times of their lives. Zuzu was a visionary, full of dreams of a life rich with purpose, travel, and making a difference. Her story serves as a heartbreaking warning: never remain in relationships that stifle your growth. Never let anyone prevent you from becoming your true self. Zuzu was close to achieving the freedom and life she dreamed of, but in the end she didn't succeed. Her story also reminds us to protect our dreams, stay independent, and never let anyone make us choose between love and freedom. In 2012, a shocking double crime involving two young parents rocked the small community of Mountain City, Tennessee. The case of Janelle Potter serves as a haunting example of how excessive protection and control can result in devastating consequences. Janelle Potter was born on January 17, 1981, in a suburb of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She was the younger of two daughters to Marvin and Barbara Potter. Barbara was a secretary at a small retail company, while Marvin was a former Marine. Janelle grew up with her older sister, Christy, who was 6 years older. However, their relationship was complicated and tense, largely due to their parents' approach to parenting. Janelle was born prematurely and was fragile and often sick from an early age. Her parents were overly protective of her, treating her with extreme care, allowing her to do whatever she wanted as long as she remained happy and smiled. In contrast, Christy was expected to help care for Janelle, often assuming the role of caretaker instead of that of a sibling. As she grew older, Christy began to resist this unfair expectation, desiring her own time and space. When she pushed back against this imbalance, she faced scolding and discipline from their parents. In the Potter family, Janelle was the focal point. She received constant praise and was treated like a princess, leading her to believe she was truly exceptional. On the other hand, her parents tightly controlled every aspect of her life from a young age, trying to shield her from even minor mistakes or risks. As a result, Janelle grew up in an emotional bubble, missing the chance to learn from experiences and face the natural consequences of her actions. As Janelle grew older, her parents gradually neglecting Christy. Christy became somewhat invisible, left to navigate life on her own and struggling to gain any of her parents' attention. Despite her hard work in school, achieving top grades, and excelling in sports, her accomplishments were often overlooked or dismissed. Nothing she did seemed to matter. In contrast, Janelle was fully aware that she was the favorite. Even as a child, she began to test limits, only to discover that there were none for her. She frequently lied, with no consequences. If something was broken, she would blame it on Christy, and their parents would believe her without question. Christy often faced scolding or punishment, even when she hadn't done anything wrong. At the age of 10, Janelle was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, leading her parents to become extremely controlling and protective. Barbara took the lead in this overprotectiveness, while her father, Marvin, mostly supported Barbara's decisions. Janelle was forbidden to play outside with other children or go anywhere on her own. When she began school, Janelle found it difficult to keep up with her studies. Her teachers noticed that she seemed disengaged, inattentive, and unmotivated. However, her parents refused to acknowledge this issue. Instead, they attributed her struggles to her health problems or suggested that her teachers were biased against her. They never reprimanded her for poor academic performance and continually reassured her that schoolwork wasn't very important. Janelle struggled to fit in at school, often getting into conflicts with her classmates. She would create stories, play tricks, and always shifting the blame onto someone else. Barbara and Marvin frequently visited the school, advocating for Janelle to be treated as special and demanding that her needs be prioritized. Many people saw Janelle as spoiled and difficult to handle. Teachers even suggested she should be suspended or expelled due to her constant disruptions, but her parents remained blind to her behavior. They believed it was always someone else's fault. In contrast, Christy graduated with honors and was accepted into a reputable college, but her parents failed to celebrate her achievements. In fact, they seemed to overlook her completely, focusing all their attention on Janelle. Taking control of her own life, Christy got a job while studying, moved out, and became financially independent. She was tired of being blamed and gradually distanced herself from her family. As Janelle grew older, she became more selfish, unapproachable. She constantly started fights, made demands, and complained. She rarely went anywhere without her mother, who always defended her, regardless of the situation, and wasn't afraid to confront anyone who questioned her daughter. The Potters were not well liked in their quiet suburban neighborhood. Many viewed them as strange, and some even felt sorry for Janelle, believing that her mother's excessive control had harmed her emotional health. However, most neighbors chose to keep their distance to avoid any conflict. Janelle graduated from high school with a below-average GPA, making college impractical, but this did not concern Barbara. She reassured Janelle that studying or working wasn't necessary, as they could fully support her. Janelle was content with that. Her days were spent watching TV and using the computer, with no limits on her screen time. Even in her 20s, her parents controlled every aspect of her life. She wasn't allowed to socialize with friends, date, or even drive. As a result, Janelle had no friends, lacked basic social skills, and was unable to make her own decisions. She did not understand the consequences of her actions or have a sense of personal responsibility. Barbara and Marvin justified their behavior as acts of love and protection, pointing to Janelle's delicate health. Janelle accepted this and enjoyed her freedom from responsibility. Her parents consistently praised and shielded her, regardless of the situation. In 2005, the Potter family chose to move to Mountain City, a small, peaceful town in Tennessee with a population of just over 3,000. In this town, almost everyone knew one another, and the crime rate was very low. It appeared to be the ideal place for a quiet and relaxed life. They purchased a modest yet comfortable home in a tranquil residential area. The newcomers quickly attracted the attention of the locals, who dropped by to introduce themselves, offered assistance, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know the family. Initially, everything went well. Barbara even made a few friends among the neighbors. However, it wasn't long before people began to notice strange behavior from the family. The adult daughter, Janelle, initially came across as polite and friendly, but if anyone disagreed with her or made the slightest critique, she would have dramatic outbursts or emotional breakdowns. Her mother would immediately leap to Janelle's defense without asking what had happened. Marvin became a regular at local hangouts, often seen enjoying a drink while sharing exaggerated stories about his supposed heroic military past. Many of these tales were either greatly embellished or entirely fabricated, and the townspeople quickly picked up on this. Nevertheless, they treated him kindly and jokingly referred to him as the local storyteller. Janelle wanted to make friends but struggled. Eventually, she devised a way to gain attention by portraying herself as a person in need of sympathy. She started telling people that she was seriously ill, claiming to suffer from various debilitating and incurable diseases. At one point, she even said she had been diagnosed with a terminal illness and didn't have much time left. People believed her and felt compassion for someone they thought was facing the end of her life. However, as time went on and she mentioned new, unrelated ailments, people began to grow suspicious. Eventually, many realized her stories didn't seem to fit together. By the late 2000s, social media became very popular, serving as a platform for making new friends, reconnecting with old ones, and finding romantic partners. Janelle, who was mostly homebound, created profiles on several social media sites and spent hours online each day. The internet became her main connection to the outside world, giving her a sense of having a social life. She filled her profiles with made-up information about herself, bragging about false achievements, fictional hobbies, and an exciting lifestyle. She was remarkably creative in crafting these personas. Janelle downloaded photos from the internet, images from parties and concerts, choosing those where people's faces were hidden by colorful lights or shadows. She edited each picture with filters and added captions that made it seem like she had attended those events. At times, she would even write detailed posts about the events she claimed to have been at, complete with names, locations, and vivid descriptions. Her posts were surprisingly convincing. Soon, Janelle gained popularity on social media, attracting followers who didn't know her in real life and believed her stories of parties, travel, and adventures. She sent out hundreds of friend requests daily, and her profile soon accumulated thousands of followers. Every post and photo received many likes and positive comments, boosting her ego. She created an entirely fictional world where she was admired, successful, and surrounded by loving friends. However, as time passed, Janelle felt that something was missing. She realized her carefully constructed online persona lacked a romantic plot. Without hesitation, she created a fake profile, this time pretending to be a man. She followed the same approach of using appealing photos from the internet, editing them, and sharing them as if they were her own. This new account also gained popularity, eventually attracting over 1,000 followers. Janelle began sharing the same party photos from both of her profiles, tagging the same places to give the impression that she and a fictitious companion were attending events together. To enhance this illusion, she complimented herself in the comments, shared poems, and wrote heartfelt messages that were all carefully curated for her followers. Some of her followers even expressed envy, commenting on how lucky she was to have such a thoughtful romantic partner. During this time, Janelle also became a member of a local online community, similar to a town forum where residents of Mountain City shared news, updates, and thoughts about events. The platform allowed for anonymity. Many users chose nicknames while some used their real names. Janelle occasionally read through discussions but rarely engaged in posting. She found it less appealing because she couldn't project an image of popularity or shine like she did on social media. The people here knew her personally and were aware of her true reputation, which some found unusual. As Janelle approached her 30s, she finally made her first true friend, Tracy Greenwell, who had grown up in Mountain City. Tracy worked at a local pharmacy. She was recognized for her intelligence, being well-read and easy to converse with. With Tracy, Janelle began to explore the outside world more. They enjoyed activities like shopping at the mall, walking in the park, hanging out at cafes, and talking on the phone every day. For the first time, Janelle's parents approved of her friendship and even welcomed Tracy into their home. Janelle flourished in this new, supportive dynamic. She finally felt heard. Janelle no longer felt the need to exaggerate or manipulate to gain attention. For the first time, someone was truly interested in her, which was a new and comforting experience. Tracy eventually introduced Janelle to her larger circle of family and friends, and soon they were spending time not just one-on-one, but as part of a larger group. Among these friends was Tracy's stepbrother, Billy Payne. He was young, well-educated, handsome, and had a great sense of humor, naturally drawing attention wherever he went. Janelle was immediately attracted to him and felt genuine romantic feelings for the first time, but unfortunately, the feelings weren't reciprocated. Janelle didn't know how to flirt or express affection casually. Instead, she sought attention and became visibly upset when it wasn't given. Her intense and erratic behavior pushed Billy away. He began to see her as unusual, keeping his distance. As Janelle's feelings grew stronger, she became increasingly obsessed. She sent Billy affectionate messages on social media and began showing up wherever he was. Despite her efforts, Billy continued to distance himself. About 6 weeks later, he publicly announced that he was in a relationship with a woman, Billie Jean Hayworth, introducing her to their friend group as his girlfriend. Following this, Billy stopped spending time with the group and focused entirely on his new relationship. Janelle was struggling emotionally, acting as if someone had taken away a treasured possession. She became erratic and demanding, begging Tracy to intervene between her brother and his girlfriend. However, this only created a rift between the two friends. Around the same time, news spread that Billy and Billy were engaged, and the community viewed them as a perfect couple. Their relationship became a popular topic, even on the town's local chat forum, with everyone seemingly supportive, except for Janelle. To her, it felt as if someone had stolen the love of her life, deepening her sense of loss into resentment, which soon turned into a desire for revenge. Eventually, Janelle made amends with her friend Tracy and asked for help in finding a new romantic partner. Tracy connected her with her cousin, Jamie Curd. Jamie was 7 years older than Janelle and worked as a tech specialist for a local company. He had struggled with relationships in the past, as many found him somewhat awkward and withdrawn. While they might have seemed like a reasonable match on paper, Janelle had different intentions. Janelle was concerned that her parents wouldn't approve of her dating someone much older, so she devised a strategy. She invited Jamie over, pretending to need assistance with her computer, setting it up, fixing issues, or installing software. Each time he came over, she praised him in front of her parents, making it clear how valuable his help was. Eventually, Barbara and Marvin invited Jamie to stay for dinner, and after that, he became a regular guest in their home. A month later, Janelle confided in her mother that she had feelings for Jamie. With her mother's support, she quickly moved forward. Just a few days later, Janelle and Jamie officially became a couple and started spending a lot of time together. However, Janelle didn't genuinely care for Jamie. She was using their relationship to provoke jealousy in Billy. Unfortunately, her plan backfired, as Billy showed no interest. In her continued efforts to get Billy's attention, Janelle managed to get invited to a family dinner at Tracy's house. She arrived holding Jamie's hand, clearly trying to make a statement, but she faced an unexpected shock. During the dinner, Billy announced that he and his girlfriend were getting married and that they were expecting a baby. This news struck Janelle like a bolt of lightning. Her hopes were dashed, and soon, a darker plan began to take shape in her mind. Just days later, harmful rumors began to spread on Mountain City's local chat forum. Anonymous posts accused Billie Jean Hayworth of living irresponsibly, claiming she had been involved with many men and had previously been treated for a serious health issue. The post suggested she was now deceiving Billy into thinking he was the father of her baby. None of this was true, but in a small town, gossip spreads quickly, and people enjoy discussing it. Someone was clearly stoking the flames, adding new accusations to keep the thread active. Soon, Billy was subjected to open insults and harsh criticism online. Despite the wave of negativity and public scrutiny, Billy supported her. He didn't believe the rumors and refused to abandon her. They both attempted to defend Billy's reputation, but it became evident that responding on social media was futile. They then reported the harassment to law enforcement. At that point, they had no idea who was behind it. Even though the forum allowed users to remain anonymous, local investigators soon traced the source of the smear campaign. When the truth emerged, the couple quickly applied for a restraining order against Janelle, prohibiting her from contacting them. However, this was just the start of a much larger conflict. Feeling trapped, Janelle created several fake social media accounts. Using these accounts, she sent herself intimidating messages and threats of violence. She then showed these messages to her parents, claiming she feared for her safety, believed that Billy and Billy wanted to harm her. Barbara and Marvin completely trusted their daughter's words. The family approached the police again, but this time, the officers traced the messages and discovered they had been sent by Janelle herself. Nevertheless, her parents refused to accept this evidence and continued to believe that their daughter was the victim. The conflict between Janelle and the couple intensified into a prolonged feud. Whenever Billy or Billy encountered any member of the Potter family in town, it often resulted in a heated argument filled with yelling, accusations, insults, and even threats. Both sides filed multiple police reports and sought restraining orders against each other. This back and forth lasted nearly a year. Eventually, things seemed to settle down. The disputes stopped appearing in the town forum. However, Janelle had actually changed her approach and was preparing to take action without the public conflict. During this time, Barbara began receiving emails from someone claiming to be a CIA operative name is Chris. He warned her that credible intelligence suggested Billy and Billy were planning to harm Janelle. Although there wasn't enough solid evidence to make arrests, he indicated that the threat was real. He also communicated with Marvin and Jamie, stressing that Janelle was in serious danger, urging them to act quickly to prevent any harm. Remarkably, within just a few weeks, this mysterious agent gained the trust of Janelle's parents and her boyfriend. Together, they began constantly messaging each other, believing they were formulating a plan to protect Janelle's life. About a month later, the operative alerted them that Billy and Billy were actively seeking someone to execute their supposed plan. He warned that time was running out and provided a detailed step-by-step guide on what needed to be done. Early in the morning on January 31, 2012, Jamie and Marvin followed the agent's instructions and drove to the home where Billy Jean, and their 7-month-old son, Tyler, were asleep, unaware of the impending danger. Jamie and Marvin entered through a first-floor window, proceeded to the couple's bedroom. Marvin was armed with a handgun he had brought from home. He approached the bed quietly and shot Billy point-blank, killing him instantly. The noise startled Billie Jean, who jumped out of bed in confusion and panic. She rushed to the nursery to grab her son, trying to escape to safety, but the men pursued her. Just as she picked up her baby, she was attacked twice in the head, killing her before she could reach the door. Remarkably, little Tyler survived the incident. Although he was traumatized, he did not suffer any serious injuries. After the violent incident, Marvin and Jamie quickly escaped the location. Neighbors, disturbed by the gunfire, promptly called emergency services. Authorities arrived within minutes. Inside the house, they discovered a tragic scene. One room contained the body of Billy, who had been shot in the head, while another room had a small child sitting in a pool of blood next to his deceased mother, Billy. Almost immediately, evidence pointed investigators to the Potter household, who a long-standing feud with the victims had been ongoing for years. The day after the murders, Johnson County Sheriff's Deputy Joe Woodard spoke with Janelle, Barbara, and Marvin at their home, and they recorded the incident. During the interview, Janelle appeared to be hiding her romantic relationship with Jamie from her parents. Later that week, authorities brought Jamie in and asked him to take a lie detector test, which showed he had lied about knowing the identity of Billy and Billy's killers. Lott said, during the interview, Jamie said something like, "Is the CIA here?" That's a very strange question for him. In a major breakthrough, Jamie told detectives that he had been texting with a man named Chris, who said he worked for the CIA and that his job was to protect Janelle at all costs. After nearly 6 hours of questioning, Jamie told police that Janelle's father, Marvin, had killed Billy and Billy. Detectives asked Jamie to call Marvin to record a confession. Police then moved in and arrested Marvin in a pre-dawn raid in February 2012. When questioned by detectives, Marvin said, "Ever since this whole thing started, his life has been in danger. His wife has been in danger. They threatened to take Janelle and cut her head off." Agent Lott then arranged for Marvin to call his wife, Barbara. That conversation was close to a confession. While Marvin was being questioned, police executed a search warrant at Potter's home. Deputy Chief Woodard said investigators found an arsenal of weapons around the house, although none of them matched the murder weapon. They also discovered printed photos of the victim and her friends in the living room. At one point, Barbara tore up the photos in what appeared to be an effort to hide them from police. Authorities seized 51 items from the home, including the family computer. When they seized Marvin's truck, they found bags of shredded documents, pictured above. An agent painstakingly recreated more than 100 pages of the thousands of emails sent to the Potter family. After looking at it closely, it seems like there's some kind of conspiracy going on here. They keep mentioning a guy named Chris who's supposed to be a CIA agent or something, Agent Lott said. CIA agent Chris apparently corresponded with Barbara, warning her of threats to her daughter's life. He was tracking people he said were harassing her on the computer and calling her. And when she was out with her dad, he said they were tracking them together, Barbara said. He said he couldn't use his real name, his real identity. Police also focused on text messages between Janelle and Jamie on the morning of the murder. Text messages showed Janelle was involved in the preparation for the murder, prosecutor Dennis Brooks said. And on the Potter family's computer, police analyzed hundreds of emails sent by CIA agent Chris from the same IP address as the home where the Potters lived. Brooks believes Janelle pretended to be Chris. Social media allowed Janelle Potter to be someone she wasn't. She created Chris. She could take on a different identity and be as hateful as she wanted, Brooks said. Prosecutors believe Janelle used the fake identity to trick her parents and incite Marvin to kill. She fed Barbara's delusions, so Barbara ignored signs that something was wrong. In August 2013, authorities arrested Janelle and Barbara for the murders of Payne and Hayworth. Jamie agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. He provided a detailed account of the events leading up to the attack, claiming he genuinely thought he was protecting the woman he loved and had no knowledge of Chris's true identity. In October 2013, Marvin Potter, who executed the fatal shootings, was convicted and sentenced to 2 life terms, while Jamie testified against him and reached a deal of 25 years in prison. In July 2015, Barbara was found guilty of helping with the plan and was sentenced to life in prison. Janelle, the mastermind behind the scheme, believed she could manipulate everyone and escape without punishment, but her complex plan ultimately failed. She was convicted of orchestrating a violent crime and was sentenced to life behind bars. In trying to portray herself as the victim, she ended up using those closest to her as pawns, leading to the loss of 2 innocent lives. Judge Blackwood said the killings were the most senseless he had seen in his decades as a judge. Tyler is in the care of his family, who are still struggling to come to terms with the loss. He will never remember his mother, who was murdered while holding him. Janelle will be 80 before she is considered for parole, Blackwood said, and Barbara and Marvin will die behind bars. Now the people of Mountain City just want to forget. No one wants to talk about these murders anymore, but the scars are still there. People now lock their doors at night, when they never did before. This has shocked the community. Roxanne was born on September 21, 1961, and grew up in a family with 2 sisters and a brother. In 1987, at the age of 26, she married Derek Duran. Before their marriage, Roxanne studied chemistry at university and worked in a pharmaceutical plant, while Derek was employed in the computer industry. Both were ambitious and career-focused but always made time for each other. Their relationship blossomed as they planned to start a family after achieving their professional goals and purchasing a home. In 1996, at the age of 34, Roxanne and Derek decided to move to the countryside to escape the noise and bustle of city life. They settled in a large house in Wales Creek, just a 30-minute drive from Portland. It was close to their workplace, yet it offered the peaceful rural lifestyle they desired. Additionally, they purchased land on the outskirts of the city, which gave them the privacy and tranquility they were seeking. It was an idyllic setting, perfect for settling down and starting a family. Initially, life in their new home was peaceful and they built close relationships with their neighbors. Their spacious house became home to several cats and dogs, but a sense of emptiness remained. Sadly, they were not successful in having children, despite keeping hope and continuing to plan for a family. At this point, Roxanne decided to restore the farm, with a dream of raising horses, a passion she soon devoted herself to. She invested heavily in the farm, determined to turn it into a profitable family business. Initially, Derek, as the primary breadwinner, was skeptical. He worried about the financial risks and questioned the feasibility of Roxanne's plans. However, she remained undeterred, often explaining how working with animals brought her peace and helped relieve stress. Eventually, they decided to expand their property to accommodate the growing farm. Sadly, Roxanne did not live to see this dream come to fruition. On Sunday, February 4, 1996, around noon, Derek left the house to buy groceries while Roxanne stayed home to rest. About 30 minutes later, neighbors living about a kilometer away noticed thick black smoke rising into the sky. While they couldn't determine the source of the fire, they suspected it was significant and called the fire department immediately. The farm's remote location delayed the fire department's arrival, which took nearly 20 minutes. By the time they reached the scene, the entire house was engulfed in flames. Fire poured from every window and door, and the roof appeared on the verge of collapse. Unable to enter the blazing structure, firefighters focused on containing the flames from the outside. Meanwhile, Derek, returning from the supermarket, spotted the smoke from afar and raced home. When Derek arrived, he saw firefighters struggling to control the fire. Noticing Roxanne's car still in the garage, he informed the fire chief that she was likely inside the house. Tragically, the flames were too intense for anyone to enter. Grief-stricken, Derek was overcome with despair. He screamed, cried, and even attempted to run into the burning building, but firefighters restrained him. Helpless, he fell to his knees and watched in agony as the fire consumed their home. The firefighters took about 3 hours to extinguish the fire. By the time the flames were under control, the house had been completely burned to the ground. In the aftermath, authorities discovered charred human remains in extremely poor condition. The damage to the remains was so severe that determining the victim's gender, let alone identifying them, was impossible. Even forensic experts had difficulty analyzing the bodies because of the severe damage, while supporting documents such as dental records were destroyed in the fire. To identify the victim, investigators opted for a more precise approach. Bone marrow samples were extracted from the remains and compared to DNA samples from Roxanne's parents. This analysis confirmed that the remains belonged to Roxanne, Derek's wife. Once her identity was established, the focus shifted to uncovering the cause of the fire and determining the circumstances of her death. The cause of the fire became a puzzling mystery. The house had been completely destroyed, leaving little evidence to explain how such a devastating blaze began. However, the fire brigade suspects that the fire may have been deliberately started by humans, as its intensity indicates signs of human involvement. This raises important questions. How could the fire have spread so fiercely, and was someone behind it? The fire spread quickly, destroying the family's entire farm, making Derek an immediate target of police attention. Authorities were baffled by Roxanne's death in the fire. Why hadn't she escaped and saved herself when the fire started? The flames did not engulf the house instantly but spread gradually, which should have given Roxanne time to take action and flee. Even if she had been asleep, the acrid smell of smoke or the sound of crackling flames would likely have woken her. Moreover, farm animals will also respond, contributing to the alarm. These factors made investigators suspect that the fire was not accidental. Of course, Derek is quickly being interrogated. Although he had recovered from the initial shock, he was still disoriented. Nevertheless, he answered the detectives' questions coherently. He claimed the fire was likely caused by an accident. He explained that he had let his wife sleep in that morning, allowing her to rest after a long work week. They had no plans that day except to relax. While she slept, he decided to run to the store, hoping to return before she woke up. Before leaving for the store, Derek attempted to make breakfast but noticed that the pipes were frozen. He went to the basement to adjust the heating system, which ran on flammable propane. According to him, the equipment had a malfunction, which could have allowed dangerous gas to leak into the utility room. Despite this, there were no apparent fire sources in the basement, as the wiring was concealed. Due to the complete destruction of the house, investigators struggled to verify Derek's account. Forensic experts and fire service specialists meticulously examined the evidence. They determined the fire started in the basement but could not identify the precise cause. Although Derek's story sounded logical, detectives remained skeptical, suspecting that something did not add up. To confirm his alibi, they asked him to provide receipts from the grocery store. Derek complied and handed over the receipt, but law enforcement still viewed him with suspicion. They theorized he might have tampered with the equipment or even set the house on fire intentionally before leaving for the store to create an alibi. Their suspicions were heightened by scratches they noticed on Derek's face during the interrogation. When questioned, he explained that the scratches were likely from clearing debris on Friday. Lacking concrete evidence against Derek, the authorities had no choice but to release him. However, the investigation remains ongoing due to suspicions that the fire might not have been an accident, especially considering the severity of it. Investigators are looking into other possibilities and are closely analyzing Derek's statements. In the garage, where there were fewer flammable materials, providing some protection from the fire, Roxanne's car was found. The police noticed that the car battery's wires were disconnected and speculated that this could have caused a spark. They theorized that the fire might have started when gas that had accumulated in the basement ignited. During this time, construction work on the house had left one wall partially dismantled, allowing an influx of oxygen. Fire experts believed this provided the conditions for gas to seep into the garage, creating a point of ignition. They also suggested that the unfinished state of the building may have accelerated the fire's spread. However, further investigation revealed no evidence linking the car or its battery to the fire. Surprisingly, the car was undamaged, which seemed unlikely if it had been the source of the blaze. The investigation then shifted to a new clue. In the basement, near the heating equipment, investigators discovered a pile of burnt pellets of unknown origin. This pile appeared to have been deliberately placed near the fire's point of origin. Initially, it was unclear what the substance was or how it might have fueled the fire. 3 days later, forensic scientists identified the pellets as cat litter. Although Derek and Roxanne had cats, their litter boxes were never kept in the basement. This raised suspicions that the placement of the litter near the heating equipment had been intentional. Detectives suspected that Derek might have used the cat litter to start the fire, but they initially couldn't determine how. Further analysis confirmed that the pellets matched the type of litter Derek and Roxanne used. A bag of the same litter was found in the house, but it had been stored far from the basement's point of origin. It was confirmed that Derek had purchased and stored this litter in his office before bringing it home. Initially, the litter was kept far from the basement. However, evidence suggested that Derek might have deliberately poured some of the litter near the heating equipment to fuel the fire. The issue was that cat litter, made from compressed sawdust, doesn't burn easily. This raised a puzzling question: how could such a small amount of litter cause a fire that destroyed the entire farm residence? A detective, who had been a Boy Scout in his youth, offered a possible explanation. He mentioned that in his Boy Scout days, counselors demonstrated survival techniques, including a trick for starting fires. It involved soaking materials to aid in ignition. Interestingly, Derek had also been a Boy Scout and might have been familiar with this fire-starting method. However, despite investigators' efforts to prove the fire was arson, they found no conclusive evidence to confirm their suspicions. Much of the evidence had been destroyed in the fire. Derek denied any involvement in the blaze, but investigators needed proof of his innocence or guilt. They brought in specially trained dogs to search the scene for flammable or explosive materials, suspecting that an accelerant like gasoline might have been used to start the fire. Given the extent of the destruction, these tools were essential. Yet even after a thorough search of the ashes, the dogs found no traces of accelerants. Tests on substances like the cat litter produced no reaction either. Investigators also looked into Derek and Roxanne's personal lives but found nothing suspicious. There were no signs that Derek or his wife, Roxanne, had enemies, and those who knew them described them as a respectable couple with a happy marriage. No one could believe that Derek might be involved in such a crime. Forensic experts from the armed forces continued their investigation at the scene. Slowly, suspicions began to take shape. Near Roxanne's body, investigators discovered a melted pistol. Its presence raised questions. Why was a weapon there? Derek explained that it could have fallen from its storage spot near the bed. The bedroom contained several legally registered firearms for self-defense. A forensic examination suggested that Roxanne might have died from a gunshot wound. However, no bullets were recovered, and the fire had destroyed much of the evidence. The poor condition of Roxanne's body made it difficult to definitively prove or disprove whether a firearm had been used, leaving investigators with unanswered questions. The final report from the forensic expert provided important clues. According to the expert, Roxanne's lungs contained no soot, confirming the investigators' suspicion. She had not inhaled smoke and must have died before the fire started. Additionally, No carbon monoxide was found in her blood, further supporting this conclusion. Unfortunately, due to the condition of the remains, the exact cause of death could not be determined. Despite this, the detectives were convinced they were investigating a murder. The circumstances strongly suggested foul play. It was unlikely that a young and healthy woman would remain trapped in bed during a fire unless something violent had occurred beforehand. Furthermore, the fire appeared to be a deliberate attempt to destroy evidence and cover up the crime. Upon closer examination, traces of blood were discovered in Roxanne's lungs, which the forensic expert believed may have resulted from a severe head injury that caused internal bleeding. This suggested that she had inhaled her own blood, which further reinforced the theory of a violent death. The key question now was, who could have killed Roxanne in the short window between Derek leaving the house and the fire starting? It seemed highly improbable that a random attacker had chosen this exact moment to strike. Investigators decided to delve deeper into Derek and Roxanne's lives to uncover any potential motives. They learned that Roxanne and Derek frequently argued, primarily over financial matters. Derek had grown frustrated with his wife's spending habits, which stemmed from her passion for horses. She had recently purchased an expensive horse, and its upkeep costs were significant. She also invested additional money into training for equestrian competitions, which demanded even more of her time and resources. Not only was this expensive, it also took up a large portion of her time and energy, leaving Derek feeling abandoned. Matters worsened a week before the tragedy when Derek's employer informed him of his upcoming promotion to a managerial position that required him to relocate. Although this was a major career advancement for Derek, it introduced even more tension into their marriage as their disagreements intensified. The problem was clear. Derek's new office was located approximately 200 kilometers away, and Roxanne was adamantly opposed to moving because of her horses. This conflict sparked several heated arguments, as confirmed by Roxanne's relatives. However, there were no prior indications of violence or cruelty, and no one suspected foul play. Roxanne's younger sister, who maintained frequent contact with her, revealed that she had planned to remain at the farmhouse. She had suggested that Derek rent an apartment near his new workplace and return home on weekends. Predictably, Derek disliked this arrangement and tried to convince Roxanne to sell the farm and move with him. She disagreed, causing tension in the family to rise. At the fire scene, forensic experts discovered that a gas hose connected to the heating system had been detached, resulting in a gas leak. Derek claimed the hose may have become dislodged during the fire, possibly when a firefighter accidentally pulled it. However, the hose was fitted with a threaded connector, which made it clear that it could not have simply come loose. Moreover, there was no visible damage to the hose, indicating that it had been deliberately unscrewed. Further forensic analysis of the ashes confirmed that the fire at the Roxanne residence was an act of arson. Once investigators received the official report, suspicions of Derek's involvement in his wife's murder were strengthened. The remaining evidence, however scant, now needs to be linked to him. Police have asked him to provide his clothing for further analysis. It was recalled that, on the day of the interrogation, a suspicious dark stain appeared on Derek's pants. Initially, this detail was overlooked, as the case had not yet been classified as a murder. However, as the investigation progressed, the stain gained significance. Derek claimed it was just dirt from working on his car and denied it could be blood. Subsequent testing revealed that the stain was indeed blood, and it belonged to Roxanne. This discovery exposed Derek's lie and reinforced the police's suspicions. In March 1996, following a month-long investigation into Roxanne's death, Derek was arrested and charged with arson and murder. From the outset, he maintained his innocence, even displaying arrogance toward authorities. He treated the trial like a chess game, casually discussing it with his friends and colleagues. The prosecution argued that on the day of the murder, Derek and Roxanne had another dispute, possibly about moving or their horses. They alleged that, in a fit of rage, he attacked and killed his wife. This claim was supported by suspicious scratches on his face, which appeared shortly before his police interrogation. The scratches resembled nail marks, but defense witnesses testified that, on the morning of February 4, 1996, Derek had been dealing with a neighbor's pets and had an altercation with their dog. Four individuals corroborated this account, suggesting the scratches could have occurred naturally. The prosecution countered with inconsistencies in Derek's explanations. At one point, he claimed the scratches were from cleaning the yard and scraping against branches. However, investigators concluded the injuries may have occurred on different days. Witnesses and Derek's lawyer offered explanations for the various marks, including the dog altercation and yard work. Despite these accounts, attention shifted to more incriminating evidence: the bloodstain on Derek's trousers. Initially, it was theorized that Derek might have been injured during the dog incident and accidentally left the bloodstain. However, forensic experts have dismissed this idea, asserting that the pattern of the bloodstains does not match the wound caused by a bite or scratch. Instead, the evidence suggested the stain resulted from a direct physical attack, possibly by Derek. In his defense, he argued that Roxanne occasionally wore his trousers while horseback riding, as they had a similar build. He speculated that she might have injured herself while riding and wiped her blood onto the pants. He maintained that he had no direct knowledge of how the bloodstain got there. The defense contended that the blood on the trousers could not conclusively link Derek to the murder, as it was unclear when the stain appeared. To reinforce this view, they invited an independent forensic expert to analyze and present a report. The expert said Roxanne had inhaled more blood than initially thought, indicating she had suffered a prolonged beating, severe facial injuries that did not kill her immediately, leading to severe bleeding. The horrifying details of Roxanne's suffering and the state of her burned body added emotional weight to the prosecution's case. However, the defense attorney emphasized that the evidence was circumstantial and based largely on assumptions rather than concrete proof, which was particularly significant given Derek's previously good reputation. The defense highlighted Derek's favorable character, arguing that no one in his life had ever seen him act aggressively or inappropriately. He was widely described as friendly, adaptable, and easygoing, despite his recent disagreements with Roxanne. Witnesses testified that he and his wife shared a loving relationship, built on mutual understanding. At work, Derek was known as a hardworking, successful IT professional who advanced quickly in his career. Neighbors described him as polite and respectful, and he had no prior legal troubles, especially not involving violence. Despite his declarations of innocence, investigators continued to scrutinize inconsistencies in his statements. Derek, despite not being interested in horses, supported his wife by helping her build a stable and a riding area, and even by joining her in equestrian classes. Following the trial's closing arguments, the jury deliberated for over 12 hours but couldn't reach a verdict. This was largely due to the forensic scientists' failure to determine the exact cause of Roxanne's death. Without conclusive evidence, Derek was not convicted of premeditated murder. However, he was found guilty of arson and negligent homicide based on his own admission that he had turned the heating system to its maximum setting and neglected to check on his wife. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Throughout the trial, he maintained his innocence and criticized the prosecution as unjust, frequently venting his frustrations to friends and colleagues. After the sentencing, public opinion largely sided with the prosecution, as the charges seemed justified. Derek served his 10-year sentence and was released on November 30, 2006, under mandatory supervision for 3 years, which he completed without any issues. After his release, he started his life over, found a new job, and, on October 15, 2010, remarried Janine, a local radio presenter. Janine firmly believed in Derek's innocence and described him as a loving, caring husband who gave her no reason to feel unsafe. Since his release, he has had no legal troubles. Despite his conviction, Derek continues to assert his innocence, maintaining that he was wrongfully accused. Although his efforts to appeal and clear his name have failed, he has expressed gratitude for the chance to rebuild his life and for the support of friends and family who stood by him. Questions about Roxanne's death remain unresolved. Was it truly an accident, or could a stranger have been involved? Share your thoughts in the comments. Oregon City is a small town located approximately 30 kilometers from Portland, Oregon, in the United States. It is generally a peaceful place, but some areas face issues with disorder and high crime rates. The town has a population of about 30,000 residents, including families like the Ponds and the Gattises. In 2002, the town's reputation was severely harmed by a series of shocking incidents. On the morning of January 9, 2002, 12-year-old Ashley Pond was getting ready for school. She had breakfast with her younger siblings and left her home at 8 a.m., heading for the school bus stop, an 8-minute walk from her apartment complex. She lived with her family in a low-income neighborhood, known for its industrial areas and frequent police presence due to domestic conflicts, burglaries, and other crimes. Ashley was a vibrant and talented girl who loved dancing and had plans to attend dance lessons after school that day. Her mother thought she would be home late because she had to attend dance class. However, by 6 p.m., Ashley still had not come home, which caused her mother to worry. First, she called the dance studio and found out that Ashley had not shown up for class. Growing increasingly alarmed, she began contacting Ashley's school and her friends. No one had seen her all day. Her friends mentioned that she hadn't even made it to school. This was unusual, as Ashley was a responsible and obedient student with no history of skipping school or running away. After exhausting all other options, her mother contacted the police to report that she was missing, providing a detailed description of her daughter. She was convinced Ashley hadn't run away and feared she had been abducted. However, detectives were initially skeptical. Ashley's mother had a troubled past. She struggled with alcoholism, had given birth to Ashley when she was only 16, and had several other children she often found difficult to care for. Some people viewed her as a bad mother, which may have influenced the initial reaction to Ashley's disappearance. Investigators initially assumed Ashley might have run away from her troubled home. However, many people who know Ashley do not believe that she would do that. At 12 years old, she is too young to make such a bold decision. Despite this, detectives did not treat the case as urgent. It was only after a week had passed that they began to suspect something serious had happened to Ashley. At that point, they started working on the theory that she had been kidnapped. Police reached out to her classmates, and, confirming their worst fears, they learned that she had neither been at school nor made it to the bus stop on the day she vanished. Over the following days, police searched the area around her apartment complex, utilizing trained dogs. Neighbors were questioned to gather any clues about her disappearance. Search teams, including community volunteers, were assembled, and detectives reviewed a list of approximately 90 local individuals with histories of abuse offenses. They also investigated suspicious residents known to have mental health issues and closely examined Ashley's online activity. Despite these efforts, no significant leads were uncovered. Complicating the matter is the fact that locals began reporting sightings of Ashley after she went missing. These claims were thoroughly investigated and dismissed as false. After a week of fruitless searching, authorities recognized the need for outside expertise. On January 18, 2002, 9 days after Ashley went missing, the police sought assistance from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. By this stage, investigators feared Ashley might not be found alive. The FBI immediately recognized the complexity of the case. There was no physical evidence, no witnesses, and no clear suspects. Ashley had seemingly vanished without a trace. A dedicated task force was formed to expand the scope of the investigation beyond the local area. Thousands of flyers featuring Ashley's photo were distributed, while law enforcement continued interviewing teachers, neighbors, and relatives to gather any potentially useful information. These efforts successfully raised public awareness, generating new tips from the community. Unfortunately, many of these tips ultimately led investigators down several dead ends. During the investigation into Ashley's relatives, detectives uncovered a disturbing incident involving her biological father. A year before her disappearance, her father had been charged with abusing her. For 3 years prior to the charges, he had been abusing her. Initially, Ashley did not even know her biological father, as she believed her stepfather, who lived with her mother, was her real dad. However, after her mother ended her relationship with the stepfather, she discovered the truth and decided to meet her biological father. Upon reconnecting with him, he took advantage of the situation and began abusing her. She visited him on weekends, but each time she returned home, she was visibly distressed. After enduring these visits for 3 years, she finally refused to meet him. Eventually, she confided in her mother, revealing what had been happening. Her mother immediately reported the abuse to the police. The case never went to trial because her father accepted a plea deal, which resulted in 10 years of probation. Investigators also considered him a suspect in Ashley's disappearance, but he was later ruled out after providing a solid alibi. Since April 2001, police have been called to Ashley's home several times for domestic conflicts and disputes. As the problems in her household escalated, she began spending more time at a neighboring house. Her classmate, 13-year-old Miranda Gaddis, lived there with her family. The two girls became close friends, attending the same school and frequently sleeping over at each other's homes. In August 1997, a man named Ward Weaver moved into a rented house on South Beaver Creek Street in Oregon City. His 12-year-old daughter, Mallory, became friends with Ashley and Miranda. All three girls were students at Gardner Middle School and attended the same dance class. Mallory's father, Ward, often drove them to school in the mornings. He is a 39-year-old man with a criminal record. He had previously served 3 years in prison for assaulting a nanny's child with a piece of concrete, and both of his ex-wives had accused him of domestic violence. At one point, one of Ashley's teachers noticed an alarming interaction. Ward kissed Ashley on the lips after giving her a ride. Concerned, the teacher reported the incident to the school principal. However, the matter was dismissed after the explanation that Ward likely viewed Ashley as a daughter and that the gesture was innocent. Over the summer of 2001, Ashley began spending even more time at Ward's house, sometimes staying there for extended periods. She even joined the Ward family on a 2-week trip to California. Upon returning from the trip, she confided to friends and teachers that Ward had harassed her. However, he denied the accusations, claiming that Ashley was lying and trying to defame him. He stated that he no longer wanted her in his home. Despite her allegations, no charges were filed against Ward. During the investigation, witnesses reported multiple instances of Ward behaving inappropriately toward Ashley. His daughter, Mallory, said there were times when he wouldn't let Ashley leave the house even if she wanted to. Despite these reports, authorities claimed there wasn't enough evidence to take action against him. Although Child Services received reports about the situation, Ashley refused to follow through with the complaints, making further legal action nearly impossible. After Ashley was eventually prohibited from visiting Ward's house, her emotional well-being, behavior, and school performance improved significantly. However, a few months later, she began visiting Ward's house again to spend time with her friend Mallory. By late December 2001, Ward's wife, frustrated with the circumstances, decided to leave their home. Less than 2 weeks after her departure, Ashley disappeared unexpectedly. Her sudden disappearance immediately raised suspicions. Ashley's close friend and classmate, Miranda, was a lively and outgoing girl who had spent most of her life in Oregon City with her family. From a young age, Miranda was considered attractive and dreamed of becoming a model. However, like Ashley, she faced significant challenges growing up. She had been abused as a child. Her biological father, although he never directly harmed her, had a criminal history involving the abuse of minors. Following their divorce, Miranda's mother entered a relationship with a new partner who faced numerous difficulties, such as coming from a marginalized background, having only a 9th grade education, and being illiterate. Tragically, this man was accused of abusing Miranda and 2 other girls. She bravely reported the abuse to authorities, leading to legal action in 1999. When Ashley went missing, Miranda became a key source of information. She showed immense courage by informing the police about the suspected abuse Ashley had endured, although her account was insufficient to clarify what had happened to her friend. Miranda and Ashley often confided in each other, sharing personal stories about their experiences with the Ward household and Miranda's biological father. Investigators suspected a connection between Ashley's disappearance and the allegations involving Ward. However, no solid evidence supported this theory. Meanwhile, rumors began to circulate that he had abused her. This led to the bullying and harassment of his daughter, Mallory, at school, deterring her from attending. Ward, angered by the accusations, denied the rumors. However, his ex-wife provided police with critical details, describing him as aggressive and difficult to handle. On March 8, 2002, 2 months after Ashley's disappearance, tragedy struck again when 13-year-old Miranda vanished. That morning, she said goodbye to her mother around 8 a.m. as her mother left for work. She planned to take the school bus, which arrived at 8:20 a.m., but she never made it to the bus stop. Her disappearance shocked the community. Just months earlier, Miranda had appeared on a TV broadcast discussing Ashley's case, pleading for her friend's safe return. Now, she had also disappeared. Family members clung to the hope that both girls were still alive and would come home safely. Miranda's case bore striking similarities to Ashley's. She was supposed to walk to the bus stop, but no one saw her on her way there, on the bus, or at school. By evening, her mother, panicked, contacted teachers, classmates, and the police. Detectives quickly noticed troubling parallels between the two cases. Both Ashley and Miranda were the same age, had similar physical features, and shared common interests, such as attending school dances. Miranda's mother insisted her daughter would never willingly talk to a stranger or run away. Known for being strong-willed, she was believed to have resisted an abduction unless the perpetrator was someone she knew. The disappearance of Miranda plunged the community into chaos. Residents demanded action, and the police were flooded with calls urging them to find the person responsible. Fear spread across the town as people began to feel unsafe, realizing a potential predator might be at large. In response, police formed a special task force and assigned 2 teams of investigators to the case. By March 15th, officers were actively following leads. However, it was revealed that a significant number of potential suspects were initially overlooked. Many individuals who temporarily or semi-permanently lived in the apartment complex where Ashley and Miranda resided were unknown to the landlords. Investigators identified 150 such people, some of whom were registered criminals. Authorities also conducted more thorough checks on local offenders with histories of abuse, about 900 in total, analyzing their possible connections to the disappearances. As weeks passed, one name repeatedly surfaced: Ward. His wife claimed that Miranda had angered him by warning local girls to steer clear of him due to his behavior. She suggested this might have been a motive for him to harm her. What is suspicious is that he gave a television interview in which he dismissed the cases, claiming that Ashley and Miranda simply ran away. Despite his questionable behavior, investigators consistently ruled him out because no evidence or witnesses directly linked him to Ashley and Miranda's disappearances. The property surrounding Ward's house had already been inspected by a dog handler and a specially trained dog. Later, an independent investigator requested permission to conduct a further investigation. Permission was granted by the homeowner, but the owner specifically asked the investigator to avoid a concrete slab that had been poured in a distant section of the property. Importantly, when the dog trainer brought the dog near the area, the dog indicated that there might be a body buried nearby. This information was submitted to the city police department in a report. However, since the dog handler was independent, further verification was required. Upon reviewing records, detectives discovered that Ward's father had a history of violent crime. He had buried one of his victims under a concrete slab in his yard. Despite this revelation, detectives did not launch a large-scale search of the property. Months have passed since Ashley went missing and there are still no clues as to her whereabouts. Many began to fear that the mystery of the 2 missing friends, Ashley and Miranda, would never be solved. Throughout this period, Ward consistently refused to provide any information. Unexpectedly, on June 30th, Ward agreed to speak with the media. He stated that he had no knowledge of what had happened to Ashley and Miranda, but admitted that he had become the primary suspect. The FBI identified several reasons for this. First, Ashley had previously accused Ward of molesting her. Second, he failed a polygraph test. Additionally, during questioning, he revealed that his father was on death row in California for murdering a girl and her boyfriend. Ward also shared details about his troubled childhood, stating that his father abandoned him at the age of 4 and subjected him to severe abuse. When Ward grew up, he reportedly directed his anger toward his younger siblings. Detectives suspected that he might have followed in his father's criminal footsteps. His media interview led investigators to reevaluate the evidence, reinforcing suspicions of his involvement in both disappearances. This prompted public outrage, with many questioning why Ward had not yet been arrested. Despite the failed polygraph test, the motives, and various suspicious circumstances, detectives felt they lacked enough evidence to charge Ward. Others had also failed polygraph tests, and Ward had allowed police to search his property multiple times, appearing cooperative. These factors contributed to the lack of action against him. By midsummer of 2002, police investigators were still hard at work, examining over 1,200 men for potential links. However, the case ultimately reached a standstill. The FBI announced a $50,000 reward for any information that could aid their investigation. The city administration contributed $10,000, and the owners of the residential complex where Ashley and Miranda lived added another $5,000. Despite these efforts, the search did not progress. Agents repeatedly appeared on television, urging citizens to report suspicious activity and highlighting the possibility that the girls might still be alive. However, these appeals yielded no significant leads. The breakthrough occurred on August 15, 2002. Meanwhile, Ward, who had been planning to leave town since early summer, packed his belongings and asked his son's 19-year-old girlfriend to help him move. After she helped carry his bags into his new home, he attacked her. He dragged her into the shower, forcibly removed her clothing, and abused her. He then attempted to strangle her, but she managed to escape. Wrapped only in a curtain, she fled the house. Realizing his plan had failed, Ward quickly packed his belongings and fled in his car. Terrified and aware of what had happened, his son, Francis, immediately called the police. Authorities stopped Ward before he could leave the city. He was arrested and charged with first-degree abuse. Due to concerns that he might flee if released, bail was set at $1 million. A week after the arrest, a significant breakthrough occurred. Francis, Ward's 24-year-old son, went to the police station and revealed that his father had confided in him before fleeing. Ward admitted to having done bad things and expressed a desire to escape. Francis suspected this was related to Ashley and Miranda but wasn't entirely certain. Following Francis's statement, authorities determined they had sufficient evidence to obtain search warrants and conduct an extensive investigation of Ward's home and the surrounding property. On August 23, 2002, a judge authorized a search warrant for the Ward property. Police sealed off the area and began a meticulous search, which was expected to take several days. On Saturday, August 24, law enforcement discovered a cardboard box containing human remains in a shed behind the house. Due to the condition of the remains, it was unclear how long they had been there, and identification would take additional time. Meanwhile, approximately 40 FBI and state police agents continued to examine the property. During the search, investigators determined that special construction equipment was necessary to excavate a concrete slab that appeared to have been poured after Ashley's disappearance. The following day, beneath the slab, they uncovered a barrel containing another set of human remains. Upon hearing this development, Ward's ex-wife expressed her outrage. She asserted that she had been convinced from the beginning that Ward was responsible for Ashley's death. Months before Ward's arrest, she had contacted the FBI, urging them to investigate him more thoroughly. She expressed fury that the delay in taking action may have allowed another victim, Miranda, to be killed. Authorities now believe that both Ashley's and Miranda's remains had been discovered on Ward's property. Ward's ex-wife also pointed out suspicious circumstances surrounding the concrete slab. She explained that the slab had been poured hastily in the middle of the night, immediately after Ashley's disappearance, which seemed unusual. Ward had claimed he planned to install a jacuzzi on the slab, but the jacuzzi never materialized. He never offered an explanation for the urgency of the construction. Within days, the remains that were found were identified as those of Miranda, Ashley's missing friend. The barrel contained Ashley's body. The hopes of their loved ones for their safe return were shattered instantly. Charges, including murder with aggravating circumstances, abuse, and second-degree abuse of a corpse, were filed against Ward in the weeks that followed. These charges were added to an existing case related to the abuse of his son's girlfriend. It also came to light that Ward might be linked to another abuse case dating back to July 2002. Prosecutors argued that the death penalty was warranted in this case. After analyzing the remains, investigators determined that both Ashley and Miranda had endured brutal violence, though the exact cause of death could not be established. Beatings, gunshot wounds, stabbing, poisoning, and strangulation were all ruled out. Ashley's body, mummified and frozen in a fetal-like position, was found fully clothed. A white rope had been tied in a specific manner around her arms, legs, and neck, resembling the position in which Miranda's body was discovered. Both bodies were wrapped in multiple layers of plastic and tightly bound. Investigators speculated that Ashley and Miranda had been kept in a freezer at the house for an extended period. Ward's fingerprints were found on the materials used to conceal their bodies. A toxicology report revealed that Ashley had a high level of alcohol in her system, equivalent to consuming 5 servings of whiskey or similar liquor shortly before her death. Miranda's body contained a lower concentration of alcohol. However, the exact amounts consumed remained unclear, as decomposition naturally produces alcohol over time. Ashley might have lost consciousness due to drinking, and it was believed that Ward had forced her to consume alcohol. It was later revealed that, just before Ashley's disappearance, Ward had attempted to get both Mallory's daughter and her friends Ashley and Miranda drunk. While the exact cause of Ashley's death could not be determined, the task force had to examine several possibilities to present in court. These included alcohol poisoning, suffocation, using a pillow, hand, or a technique that cut off blood flow to the brain, asphyxiation, confinement in a sealed container, or the use of rare illegal substances or poisons that were difficult to detect in toxicology tests. Following Ward's arrest, he continued to speak to reporters, proclaiming his innocence. He presented autopsy reports to support his claims, arguing that since prosecutors could not identify the exact cause of Ashley's and Miranda's deaths, they would not be able to prove his guilt. He also suggested that someone else might have buried the bodies on his property to frame him. However, the prosecution had substantial evidence against him, including accusations of abuse, Ashley's previous statement about harassment, testimony from other victims, and circumstantial evidence. Key pieces of evidence included Ward's fingerprints on the ropes and bags used to bind the bodies. Furthermore, prosecutors pointed out that Ward's father had been on death row for committing a similar crime. When the judge became aware of Ward's interactions with the media, a gag order was issued to ensure a fair trial. Despite this, Ward contacted a reporter, claiming that the judge could not stop him from exercising his free speech, a statement some interpreted as defiance. On April 22, 2004, shortly before the trial, Ward's lawyer submitted evidence suggesting that he had been mentally unstable at the time of his arrest. Ward had carved his daughter's name into his arm, inflicted injuries on his chest, and repeatedly banged his head during altercations. He maintained that he was being imprisoned simply for disciplining his daughter. A defense psychiatrist diagnosed him with severe depression and narcissistic personality disorder. However, the prosecution's psychiatrist argued that Ward was exaggerating his symptoms. Ward's erratic behavior in jail eventually led to his placement in solitary confinement. He was prescribed high doses of antidepressants and, due to his mental state, was transferred to a psychiatric hospital. The trial was temporarily suspended while professionals evaluated whether Ward was feigning his symptoms. By late summer of 2004, psychiatrists deemed him mentally competent to stand trial for murder and other charges. Fearing a death penalty conviction, Ward's lawyer negotiated a plea bargain with the prosecution, a choice supported by Ashley's and Miranda's families. On September 22, Ward pleaded guilty to 7 of the 17 charges against him, including murder with aggravating circumstances, abuse, and abuse of a body. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. As part of the plea agreement, the death penalty was dropped. After the sentencing, Ward's son Francie expressed relief, stating that he was grateful his father would never harm anyone or destroy lives again. However, Ward refused to disclose where and how Ashley and Miranda had died, leaving their families desperate for answers. In 2009, Miranda's younger sister visited Ward in prison twice in hopes of obtaining the truth. She believed this was the only way to find closure and peace. During the second visit, Ward admitted to killing both girls, describing how he had strangled them with his bare hands and buried their bodies on his property. Disturbingly, he boasted about successfully hiding their remains to avoid detection by authorities. Shockingly, he told Miranda's sister that if she had been older at the time, he would have likely killed her too. Ward was incarcerated at the East Oregon Correctional Facility, along with 4 other inmates. This section of the prison is specifically designated for individuals convicted of severe crimes, with inmates kept isolated from one another for safety reasons. Despite these precautions, the measures proved insufficient. On March 4, 2007, an inmate working as a barber attacked Ward. Inmate barbers in correctional facilities are required to use electric razors for safety, but he wielded a homemade razor and stabbed Ward in the neck. Security intervened, apprehending him and saving Ward's life. The exact motive for the attack remains unclear, though it is believed to be connected to Ward's criminal history. On February 14, 2014, Ward's son, Francis Weaver, who was 31 years old at the time, was arrested and later convicted of murdering prohibited substance dealers in Canby, Oregon. He was sentenced to life in prison. This crime marked yet another act of violence linked to the Weaver family, making it the third consecutive generation of men in the family associated with murder. In 2019, following an executive order from California's governor imposing a moratorium on the death penalty, Ward had his death sentence commuted to life imprisonment and was transferred to the general prison population.
It was a quiet night in the small town of Matapalo, Guanacaste, but inside one house, a terrible event was unfolding. A man had just assaulted his partner, while a child nearby attempted to escape. Suddenly, everything went silent. What occurred in that house? And how did the little girl manage to survive? Jessica Duran grew up in Costa Rica. From a young age, she experienced neglect, not because she lacked family, but due to a lack of proper care. Locals often saw her wandering the streets barefoot, unkempt, and hungry, frequently asking for food. She dropped out of school early and soon became involved in addiction. By age 13, she was often seen in local bars, dressed provocatively, smoking marijuana, drinking beer, and seeking clients. When she turned 20, she became pregnant for the first time. Little is known about that child, except that reports indicate the baby was taken in by the paternal grandmother. A year later, Jessica met a man at a bar. He was also using banned substance, and they began a tumultuous relationship. After 3 years, Jessica became pregnant again. However, before the baby was born, he was arrested and imprisoned for attempted homicide. Once again, the paternal grandmother took care of the baby. Despite the man being in prison, their relationship continued. During one conjugal visit, Jessica became pregnant again and gave birth to a daughter. This time, she was able to keep the child. Jessica and her daughter were homeless until an old friend offered them shelter. To support herself, Jessica returned to escort. Jessica then met Dirk Beauchamp, an American who had visited Costa Rica multiple times. He became very attached to her, and they soon moved in together. However, concerns arose when neighbors noticed that Jessica's daughter was being left alone for long periods. Eventually, the couple was evicted and moved to a new home in Matapalo. Jessica's family grew when she had 3 more children. Dirk accepted all 4 children, including Jessica's stepdaughter, and gave them his last name, Beauchamp. The community viewed him as a dedicated father, often seen walking his children to school, taking them to music lessons, and spending afternoons with them in the local plaza. However, Jessica had not changed. She continued to struggle with substance use, leading to noticeable drinking and erratic behavior that concerned neighbors. Meanwhile, the grandmother of her second child filed for child support. Jessica ignored the legal notice and was ultimately imprisoned in 2015 at El Buen Pastor, a women's prison in Costa Rica. While she was in jail, Dirk had to care for all 4 children by himself. Those who knew the family said he faced difficulties and sometimes couldn't provide even basic meals. Social workers from the National Child Welfare Agency came to evaluate the family's situation, but Dirk claimed everything was fine, likely out of fear that the authorities would take the children away. While still in prison, Jessica met a man named Michael Adrian Salmeron Silva. After she was released, she returned home not only pregnant with Michael's child, but also with him by her side. This marked the beginning of a new and tumultuous chapter in Jessica's life. She was open about her relationship with Michael, expressing how deeply in love she was with him, despite their shared struggles with addiction. Michael set up a makeshift living space next to the Beauchamp family home and moved freely between both residences, treating them as one. Even Jessica's mother disapproved of the relationship, which prompted Jessica to cut off all contact with her. Dirk, an older and naturally quiet man who avoids conflict, put up with the situation to remain near his children. He also welcomed Jessica's new baby, her daughter with Michael, into their home. However, as time passed, neighbors started to see a shift in Dirk. His previously warm and lively demeanor diminished. He looked more tired and was visibly affected, both physically and emotionally, by the unstable environment he was living in. On the morning of February 16, 2016 at 8:40 a.m., a social worker from the Costa Rican Social Security Fund arrived at the Beauchamp residence for a routine welfare check. He had visited this home many times to check on the children's health and ensure the family had basic support. However, this time felt different. The house was completely sealed and disturbingly quiet, with vultures circling overhead. Worried, he approached a nearby man who was taking care of livestock and asked if the silence was typical. The man shook his head. The children usually played outside. They moved closer to the fence, and then they heard it, a child crying inside. There were no other sounds, no voices, and no movement. Realizing the urgency of the situation, he quickly called emergency services. When the officers arrived, they heard a child's crying coming from beyond the fence. They shouted, threw stones onto the roof, and tried to get a response from inside, but no one answered. Realizing they couldn't wait any longer, they forced open the outer gate and carefully approached the house. Looking through a window, they saw a young girl crouched on the floor, her clothes dirty. They checked another window, which was swarming with flies, and noticed that her clothing was stained with blood. They used a metal bar to pry open a door, with their weapons ready, unsure if the attacker was still inside. As they moved closer to the child, they saw she had injuries on her head. All she requested was water. They surveyed the area and were horrified to find the mutilated body of an adult male nearby. It was Dirk. The officers moved further into the house. In the first bedroom, they found two bodies under a blood-stained sheet, Jessica and her 6-year-old daughter, both lying in a pool of blood. Disturbed, the officers stepped back and headed to the back of the house, where they heard a baby's cries. In a separate room, they discovered a 6-month-old infant lying alone on a bed. Fortunately, she seemed unharmed. Even though they feared the attacker might still be inside, they continued their investigation. In the bathroom, they found the body of the oldest daughter. She was partially undressed and had multiple injuries. There was still one last room to check. Inside, there was more blood, with streaks and splatters leading to an adjacent bathroom. There, they found a boy's body. The house was silent now. No one else was there. The officers radioed their station to report the tragic scene. The little girl, who had been asking for water, finally received a drink. She attempted to sit up, but her injuries made it very difficult for her to move. First responders advised her to stay still, as they understood her injuries were likely more serious than they looked. While authorities gathered evidence and removed bodies from the Beauchamp home, the two young survivors of the tragic event were quickly taken to the hospital. The 4-year-old girl was in critical condition, barely conscious, and had multiple stab wounds to her chest, abdomen, arms, and head. Her 6-month-old sister was stable but severely dehydrated, having gone nearly 48 hours without food or water. Both girls were then transferred to the National Children's Hospital in San Jose for additional treatment. A year later, the police officer who responded to the scene reflected on the experience. There had been signs of trouble before. Jessica had filed a domestic violence complaint against her partner, Michael. Given the chaotic situation at home, Michael, who is 24 years old, became the main suspect in a case involving 5 murders. The bodies were found on February 16th, but forensic evidence indicated that the murders happened 2 days earlier, on the night of February 14th, Valentine's Day. Investigators quickly started to trace Michael's steps. Security footage from a store about 700 meters from his home showed that he visited 3 times that night, purchasing beer, soft drinks, cigarettes, and a phone card. Knowing that Michael could potentially escape the country, Costa Rican authorities issued an international arrest warrant the following day. Michael had a prior history of aggravated theft in Costa Rica. With an extradition request now in place, the search for him intensified. Within 48 hours, Nicaraguan authorities confirmed his arrest. While officials initially credited police efforts for the capture, Michael's father later disclosed that he was the one who turned him in. He claimed that Michael admitted to killing Jessica and the children out of jealousy while under the influence of banned substance and alcohol. Despite his father's assertions of remorse, Michael did not display any emotion in the days after his arrest. When he was presented to the media, he appeared emotionless, maintaining a cold demeanor and showing no signs of regret. Michael was detained at the prison in Nicaragua as he awaited his trial. On March 30th, a pre-trial hearing took place, attended by Costa Rican officials. The highlight of this hearing was the expected testimony from Jessica's daughter, the living witness to the massacre, who is only 4 years old. She connected through video from the Children's Hospital in Costa Rica, along with a judge and a psychologist. During her testimony, she clearly identified Michael as the person responsible for the attacks. She recounted how he first stabbed her mother, followed by Dirk, and then her siblings. She described the violent events in disturbing detail, even specifying the body parts where each family member had been injured. Throughout this, Michael remained completely still. Extradition was quickly dismissed as an option. Similar to Costa Rica, Nicaragua's constitution does not allow the extradition of its own citizens for trial in other countries. As a result, Michael's trial would happen in Nicaragua. Costa Rican officials began sending all relevant evidence, witness statements, and investigative documents to their Nicaraguan counterparts to facilitate the legal process. On April 19th, a preliminary hearing was held. The prosecutor presented the charges in distressing detail: 5 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, 1 count of aggravated abuse, and 1 count of endangering a person's safety. On the night of February 14th, the official report states that Michael entered the bedroom where Jessica was sleeping next to her 6-year-old daughter. He was armed with a kitchen knife and stabbed Jessica twice, once in the collarbone and once in the chest. As Jessica fell, the girl tried to help her mother but was attacked by Michael, who stabbed her 5 times in the back. Michael then turned his focus to Dirk, hearing the screams. Dirk grabbed a second kitchen knife to protect his family. However, he could not compete with Michael, who was younger, stronger, and fueled by something evil. Dirk initially sustained minor injuries, but then Michael struck with deadly accuracy. He stabbed Dirk in the left arm, made deep cuts to his neck and side of his head, and delivered 8 brutal blows to his back, another 8 to his chest. In total, Dirk suffered 19 stab wounds that led to his death. Michael's violent rampage turned into a horrific nightmare. He targeted 8-year-old Jessica's son, who tried to escape to his bedroom but was cornered. In a desperate attempt to protect himself, the boy was slashed on the hand. Though he made it to the bathroom, Michael continued to attack, stabbing him 3 times in the back, 7 times in the chest, hitting his lungs and heart. Next, he turned his attention to 12-year-old another girl, who was hiding in a locked room. Michael broke in and stabbed her 3 times in the back before abusing her. The brutality escalated as he struck her 9 times in the head and 5 times in the chest. Afterward, he dragged her body to the bathroom, placed it in the shower, and attempted to wash away the blood. The violence persisted. 4-year-old the girl was hiding behind a door in another room. When Michael discovered her, he pulled her by the hair and slammed her against the wall. Then he used a knife, cutting her head, neck, body, and arms. The child lost consciousness, and Michael thought she was dead. He only spared 1 child, 6-month-old. The baby has been his biological daughter, which could explain why she was not harmed. As the prosecutors recounted the events in court, the atmosphere was filled with disbelief and sorrow. Everyone, except for Michael, listened intently to the horrific details, while Michael remained expressionless. In the meantime, the bodies of Jessica and her children were returned to her family, with Jessica's mother taking responsibility for their burial. Since U.S. authorities could not find any relatives for Dirk, he was buried next to Jessica and her children with her family's permission. The 4-year-old girl faced a challenging path to recovery. A stab wound to her skull had left her partially paralyzed on the left side of her body. She was hospitalized for 3 months, and doctors were hopeful about her physical recovery. However, the emotional scars ran much deeper. She had witnessed her family's brutal murder, endured her own vicious attack, and spent 2 days at the scene before being rescued. The hospital staff affectionately called her the Little Champion as she gradually began to regain her smile and mobility. Like her younger sister, she was placed in a caring, temporary home. Authorities began looking into adoption options, considering keeping the sisters together. Jessica's mother sought custody of the girls, but ultimately, in 2018, Costa Rica's Child Welfare Agency decided that separate adoptions would be in the girls' best interests. They concluded that none of Jessica's family members were equipped to address the girls' complex emotional needs. Given Jessica's own difficult upbringing, officials believed they were making the safest choice for their future. The girls' former home, where the massacre occurred, became a grim landmark. It stood silently, serving as a painful reminder of the tragedy. Locals shared stories of strange occurrences there, including sightings of the family's spirits near the site. Meanwhile, legal proceedings for Michael were moving forward. On June 10, 2016, a special hearing took place where he admitted to the killings. His defense team requested lighter sentences in exchange for his confession, but prosecutors sought the maximum penalties: 25 years for Jessica's femicide, 30 years for Dirk's murder, 15 years for the girl's abuse, plus 30 years for her murder, 30 years for the boy's murder, 30 years for the girl's murder, 20 years for the attempted murder of the girl, and 3 years for abandoning infant. In total, they requested a sentence of 183 years. On July 16, 2017, more than a year after the tragic massacre, justice was served when Nicaraguan judge sentenced Michael Adrian Salmeron Silva to 183 years in prison, meeting the prosecution's request. For the first time, Michael reacted by bowing his head and tapping his fingers on the table, likely contemplating the lengthy prison term ahead. However, under Nicaraguan law, the maximum prison sentence is 30 years, which means Michael could be released at the age of 55 unless laws change. The town of Matapalo will always remember the children who once filled their plaza with laughter, music, and kindness. Dirk, the American father, sacrificed everything to protect the children he loved and died alongside them. Following the tragedy, a debate emerged over who was responsible. Was it solely Michael, the decisions made by Jessica, the impact of banned substance and alcohol, or a broader cycle of neglect and violence that spiraled out of control? A young woman was on her way home after spending a night out with friends, but she never arrived. Jessica Lynn Callagher was born on May 8, 1982 in Austin, Texas, where she lived with her parents and 2 brothers. Jessica was warm, friendly, and easily made friends. Beyond her sociable nature, she was very ambitious, had a clear goal since high school. She wanted to become a teacher. To achieve this, she enrolled at Texas State University and earned her bachelor's degree in science. Jessica then decided to pursue a master's degree while working as a teaching assistant at an elementary school and taking a part-time job at a grocery store. Despite her busy schedule, she maintained a positive attitude, believing that her hard work would eventually lead to success. On September 7, 2009, Jessica had a day off. She spent it with her friends and cousin, Melanie. They began the day by lounging at the pool and went out for dinner. Afterwards, they visited a bar to play pool. At the end of the night, Jessica became the designated driver, ensuring everyone got home safely. She dropped off Melanie last, around 1:30 in the morning. Melanie invited Jessica to stay over, but Jessica declined since she had an early shift at the grocery store and needed to stop at a 24-hour shop to buy food for her dogs. After saying goodbye to her cousin, she left. A few hours later, as morning arrived, Melanie got a call from one of Jessica's co-workers. She learned that Jessica had missed her shift, which was unusual since Jessica never skipped work without a valid reason. At that time, Jessica had been promoted to store manager, adding to her responsibilities. Weren't he worried? Melanie called over several friends, but none had heard from Jessica that morning. She then contacted her brother, John Ridenour, who lived with Jessica. John told Melanie he hadn't seen her either. John, a police officer, had started his shift at 5:30 a.m. and hadn't noticed if Jessica had come home during the night. He also hadn't checked her room before leaving for work. Concerned, he quickly returned home. But Jessica was still missing. It seemed she hadn't been home at all, as her dogs were acting unusually, almost as if they hadn't been fed in a while. This raised alarm bells. Something was definitely wrong. John quickly contacted his colleagues at the police department to track Jessica's phone. The signal led them to a restaurant near her home. Melanie and her boyfriend hurried to the restaurant and soon found Jessica's car in the parking lot. However, when they approached and opened the door, they were horrified to see that Jessica was slumped in the driver's seat, unresponsive. Her skin was badly sunburned, and the inside of the car was extremely hot. Melanie's boyfriend immediately called the police, who sent officers and an ambulance to the scene. Paramedics confirmed that Jessica was dead, and her body was taken for further investigation. It was evident that she had likely been attacked. Investigators started looking into Jessica's car. They quickly noticed that the driver's seat was pushed too far back. Given the injuries she had, detectives believed she might have been attacked while still in the car. They also found that her keys, wallet, and credit cards were missing. On the back seat, there was a bag of dog food, indicating that Jessica had been in the car since the night before, as she intended to go to the store right after dropping off her cousin. After searching the car thoroughly, detectives entered the restaurant near the parking lot where Jessica's car was found. This is when the investigation took an unexpected twist. One of the restaurant employees informed the investigators that when she arrived for work early that morning, she saw Jessica's car and noticed that Jessica was still alive at that time. The witness reported that Jessica was sitting inside her car, completely undressed and behaving oddly, as if she were under the influence. Although the scene was unusual, the employee didn't dwell on it and went inside to begin her shift. Shortly after, she stepped outside again and saw Jessica sitting by her car. Jessica had put her clothes back on but was still acting strangely, just sitting there and running her hands through her hair. When the employee went outside a third time, Jessica was back in her car, talking to herself and making odd hand gestures. The police later discovered several more witnesses who had seen Jessica alive that morning. Despite her unusual behavior, no one called for help or checked on her well-being. After interviewing the witnesses, detectives returned to Melanie and asked if Jessica might have been drinking alcohol or taking banned substance. Melanie firmly stated that Jessica had been sober that night, as she was the designated driver responsible for getting everyone home safely and had worked the next day. She also claimed that Jessica had never used banned substance. The situation puzzled the investigators, but they later uncovered a possible explanation. Medical examiners discovered signs of strangulation on Jessica's body, including marks from hands and a likely rope or belt. She also had numerous bruises, scratches, and she had been abuse assaulted. Experts noted that her trauma could have resulted in a brain injury, which was worsened by the hours she spent inside a hot car in the sun. This might clarify her unusual behavior, her disorientation, and why she didn't call for help. It is likely that Jessica was so affected that she didn't understand what was happening to her, eventually leading to death. Toxicology reports confirm Melanie's earlier statement. Jessica had no alcohol or banned substance in her system. If any of the witnesses had called for medical assistance, doctors might have been able to save her, but it was now too late. Detectives needed to determine who was responsible for her death. They began by searching for CCTV footage, but unfortunately, there were no cameras in the parking lot where Jessica was found. However, they made an important discovery. If she had bought dog food late at night, it was likely that she stopped at the 24-hour Walmart across the street. The detectives obtained the store's security footage, which showed Jessica arriving, walking into the store alone, and there were no indications that anything was wrong. She went straight to the pet food aisle, picked up a large bag, and proceeded to the checkout. Everything appeared normal, but as she exited the store, detectives observed something noteworthy. Just a few seconds later, a man followed her outside. Detectives reviewed more footage and noted that the man arrived at Walmart just minutes before Jessica. He parked at the far end of the parking lot, entered the store, but instead of shopping, he went straight to the restroom and then left. When detectives checked the entrance camera, they saw him following closely behind Jessica and appearing to be in a hurry. However, there was an issue. Jessica's car was parked behind a large tree, which blocked the camera's view. Despite this, the footage allowed them to track the man's movements. He approached Jessica's car, went behind the tree, and did not emerge again. 2 minutes later, Jessica's car exited the parking lot. A surveillance camera later recorded a vehicle arriving at the restaurant parking lot where Jessica was discovered the next morning. Shortly after, an individual got out of Jessica's car and walked across the lot toward the parking area of Walmart. This individual then got into the same vehicle that a suspicious man had driven earlier. Detectives were nearly certain that this person was involved in Jessica's murder, but the quality of the surveillance footage made it difficult to identify him or his vehicle clearly. However, the detectives still had some options. With Jessica's credit cards missing, they examined her accounts for any recent transactions and discovered a lead. One of her cards had been used at a gas station approximately 20 minutes after her car was left at the restaurant. They obtained the gas station's surveillance footage and quickly recognized the red pickup truck associated with their suspect. When they checked the camera near the register, their suspicions were confirmed. It was indeed the same man. This provided proof that he had Jessica's credit card, making him appear even more guilty. The detectives then released the footage of the suspect and his vehicle to the news, seeking help from the public for any information about him. Detectives continued their search for more evidence, but found no new leads. Days went by without any significant developments until they received a call from a woman. She claimed that the man in the security footage resembled her fiancé's best friend, Crispin Harmel. She also mentioned that Crispin was expected to visit that evening to repay some money he owed, but he never arrived. After seeing the news report about Jessica's murder, she recognized him in the surveillance video. Although she was shocked to think he could be involved in such a terrible crime, she understood that she needed to inform the police. Detectives started investigating Crispin's background and soon found a significant detail. Just weeks before Jessica's murder, a patrol officer had stopped him for driving with an expired license. When the investigators examined the officer's body camera footage, they noticed that Crispin closely matched the description of their suspect. Moreover, he was wearing the same baseball cap as the person in the surveillance video. 5 days after Jessica's murder, police visited Crispin's home. They immediately noticed his pickup truck, which was the same model as the one captured on surveillance footage. However, there were some changes. The chrome details visible in the video had been painted over in black. When detectives knocked on his door, Crispin surprised them by quickly admitting that he had met Jessica that night. He explained that they connected through an adult website and arranged to meet for a casual hookup. Crispin said they met in the Walmart parking lot, where he got into Jessica's car. He claimed she drove them to a park, where they had intimate before returning to Walmart. Before parting ways, they talked in her car, during which he mentioned his financial struggles. According to him, Jessica then gave him her credit card so he could buy gas. After saying their goodbyes, they went their separate ways. The next day, after seeing news reports about Jessica's murder, Crispin panicked and feared he might be accused. He disposed of her credit card and repainted parts of his truck. Although Crispin recounted his story confidently, detectives recognized it as a lie, viewing it as a desperate attempt to evade responsibility. The surveillance footage contradicted his account. He claimed they had planned to meet in the Walmart parking lot, but he only approached Jessica after she had returned to her car. He also said she drove him back after their supposed meeting, but the footage clearly showed him walking back to his own truck alone. Jessica's car remained in the parking lot until the next morning, and no one else interacted with it. Detectives collected Crispin's phone and computer, as well as Jessica's devices, because they suspected there was no evidence of communication between them. No messages, no calls, nothing. In fact, Jessica had never visited the adult website that Crispin claimed they used to arrange their meeting. However, when investigators examined Crispin's computer, they discovered something noteworthy. Just hours after the police found Jessica's body, he searched for and read several news articles about her murder. Jessica's friends and family also doubted Crispin's story. They believed she would never seek a one-night stand or meet a stranger in a parking lot at night. That behavior was simply not in her character. Additionally, She had told a friend that she needed to rest before her morning shift and still had to feed her dogs. There was no way she would have gone out for a secret late-night date. Investigators thought that Crispin was trying to shift the blame onto others. However, the overwhelming evidence against him made it difficult for him to create a credible excuse. Based on the surveillance footage, detectives reconstructed the likely sequence of events. Crispin probably saw Jessica inside Walmart and decided to target her. He followed her to her car, got in, and used threats to prevent her from crying out or resisting. It seems he then forced her to drive to a nearby park, where he abused her. Afterward, he returned to the parking lot near Walmart, closer to his own truck. Before leaving, he strangled her and took her wallet and credit cards. When the police confronted Crispin about the incident, he stopped answering questions and requested a lawyer. Despite there being strong evidence against him, investigators faced a significant challenge that could jeopardize the entire case. Jessica had survived for several hours after the attack, which posed a major legal issue. The problem was that medical experts could not definitively explain why this occurred. Cases like hers were so rare that they had not been thoroughly studied. While the official cause of death was identified as strangulation, there had never been a documented case of someone being strangled, surviving for hours, and then dying later as a direct result of the attack. The only way to solidify the case would be a confession, but Crispin refused to admit to any wrongdoing. Detectives faced a challenging situation. They believed that Crispin was guilty of Jessica's murder, as no one else could have committed the crime. However, since Jessica had survived until the morning after the attack, there was a significant concern that the case might not hold up in court. To bolster their case, investigators examined Jessica's car for more evidence, but found nothing. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, and no other evidence linking Crispin to the crime scene. Prosecutors discovered a temporary way to proceed. They charged Crispin with evidence tampering linked to Jessica's case. Crispin had confessed to disposing of her credit card and repainting his truck, which were obvious attempts to conceal his actions. They had his own admissions as evidence. In May 2010, Crispin pleaded guilty and received a 10-year prison sentence for evidence tampering. Detectives were committed to achieving justice for Jessica and refused to give up. They needed strong scientific evidence to link Crispin to her murder. For years, their efforts led to no significant breakthroughs. Then in 2013, they found a scientific article that changed the course of the investigation. The article discussed cases in which strangulation did not immediately cause death, but instead resulted in a condition called delayed death syndrome. This syndrome can lead to brain damage, causing victims to feel confused, disoriented, and unable to seek help. The article's findings closely aligned with Jessica's behavior following the attack and reinforced the initial medical examiner's belief that she had suffered a brain injury, leaving her unaware of her situation until it was too late. Detectives contacted the author of this article right away and began constructing a murder case against Crispin using advanced medical sciences support. In May 2014, Crispin was officially arrested for murder, but he still maintained his innocence throughout the process. During the trial, his defense attorney emphasized a critical point. There was no DNA evidence linking Crispin to the crime. The prosecution contended that Jessica had fought back during the attack and likely scratched her assailant, which should have left DNA traces under her fingernails. However, forensic experts for the prosecution highlighted an important detail. Jessica had been trapped in her car for hours in extreme heat. At such high temperatures, DNA breaks down quickly, and by the time her body was examined, any genetic material under her nails would have completely degraded and been unrecoverable. Prosecutors built their case against Crispin using strong forensic evidence and extensive surveillance footage that strongly indicated his guilt. However, a complication arose when Crispin's lawyer challenged the accuracy of the timestamps on the video evidence. Initially, the footage obtained from the security cameras did not have any timestamps. Since the timing of events was critical, prosecutors applied specialized software to add timestamps later, which gave the defense a chance to question the integrity of the evidence. Crispin's attorney contended that this was a significant issue because he had not received the original footage with the timestamps included. Ultimately, the judge ruled in favor of the defense, resulting in a mistrial. Consequently, Crispin avoided conviction due to this technicality. Nevertheless, he remained in prison, serving his 10-year sentence for evidence tampering. Prosecutors quickly started preparing for a new trial. Over the next few years, Crispin's legal team worked diligently to stop the retrial, arguing that it would violate his rights. Ultimately, however, a higher court decided in favor of the prosecution, allowing the trial to proceed. The new trial began in 2018, and this time, the prosecution meticulously addressed every aspect of the case, ensuring the defense couldn't take advantage of any loopholes. They successfully convinced the jury of Crispin's guilt, resulting in his conviction for murder. Crispin Harmel received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors opted not to seek the death penalty, believing it might jeopardize their chances of a guilty verdict. They were aware that the delayed death syndrome argument could create doubts for the jurors, and in death penalty cases, a conviction requires complete certainty. A few years later, Crispin attempted to appeal his sentence, but his request was turned down. Consequently, he is still in prison with very little chance of being released. Jessica's family expressed gratitude to the investigators and prosecutors for their unwavering commitment to seeking justice, even though it took 9 years to achieve a verdict. However, they also shared that they had hoped the sentencing would provide them with some relief and closure. But ultimately, no punishment for Crispin could ever really alleviate their suffering.
On a hot, humid night in Louisiana, the silence was shattered by screams. A young man, naked and tied up, ran through the streets, desperately calling for help. Pursuing him was an unexpected figure, a man whom neighbors considered quiet and polite. Some residents peeked outside but chose to remain indoors, assuming it was merely a disagreement. He vanished into the darkness, while his pursuer returned to his trailer. At that moment, no one understood the gravity of the situation or realized it was the start of a much darker story. A hidden monster lived among them, and it would take years for the truth to emerge. Ronald Joseph Dominique was born on January 9, 1964, in Thibodaux, Louisiana, a small town located in the swampy southern part of the state. He was one of 6 children in a large family. The atmosphere in the Dominique home was tough, poverty loomed over them and emotional support was lacking. The family's financial struggles, the challenges of raising so many children created a daily life filled with tension and neglect. From a young age, Ronald was different from his peers, not in ways that earned him approval. He displayed traits that were seen as feminine, such as a gentle walk and a preference for spending time with girls instead of boys. In a community that valued traditional gender roles, these characteristics made Ronald a target for mockery and exclusion, particularly from his father. Their relationship was strained. His father's disappointment in Ronald's lack of interest in typical masculine activities only widened the emotional gap between them. Although Ronald's relationship with his mother was not as hostile, she was overwhelmed by the demands of raising 7 children and struggled to give Ronald the love, attention he needed. This sense of alienation marked Ronald's childhood both at home and in the wider community. His brothers participated in the bullying, often using homophobic slurs, which reinforced his isolation. One troubling detail is that Ronald was made to live in a small trailer on the family's property, separating him from the main house and symbolizing his exclusion. School didn't provide any relief for Ronald. He faced constant bullying from classmates, suffering insults, public humiliation, and physical intimidation. Despite his gentle and reserved demeanor, he became a regular target. A particularly painful memory from high school occurred during a homecoming dance when he attended with a close female friend. Throughout the evening, he spent a lot of time dancing with another boy, which attracted attention. This incident led to an increase in both verbal and physical harassment that he was already experiencing. One of the most painful experiences of Ronald's early life was the abuse he endured from a priest. This abuse occurred on at least 2 occasions and left deep emotional scars. When Ronald bravely told his parents about it, hoping for their support, they did not believe him. Their disbelief not only left him vulnerable to more abuse but also broke the trust he had in his family. Amidst this chaos, Ronald begins to understand his true gender. He realized he was gay from a young age, but the hostile and homophobic atmosphere he lived in forced him to hide his true self. He feared rejection and violence, which weighed heavily on him emotionally. After graduating high school, Ronald sought a way to escape. He moved closer to New Orleans, a city known for its rich culture and more accepting LGBTQ community. For him, this move represented a desperate quest for freedom and a fresh start, away from the harsh judgments of Thibodeau. In his early adulthood, he bought a small trailer, which became his home. Although modest, it symbolized his first experience of independence, a personal space free from his family's oppressive influence. However, the trailer also highlighted the financial struggles that followed him into adulthood. He has a low-paying job, often relied on public assistance just to cover basic expenses. This economic hardship affected his self-esteem and made him feel increasingly vulnerable socially. In New Orleans, Ronald began to explore his true gender more openly. The city's lively nightlife, filled with gay bars, clubs, and vibrant LGBTQ events, offered him a liberating experience unlike the oppressive atmosphere of his upbringing. For the first time, he felt capable of living freely without the constant fear of rejection. However, adjusting to this new environment proved to be challenging. Ronald was often perceived as socially awkward and, by typical standards, not very physically attractive. These characteristics made it hard for him to build meaningful connections, even within the more accepting LGBTQ community. His feelings of insecurity and social discomfort only intensified his loneliness. In his quest for acceptance, Ronald turned to the local drag scene, an energetic subculture within New Orleans' LGBTQ community. Influenced by his love of music and his admiration for singer Patti LaBelle, he chose Patti as his stage name. However, his attempts at performing were disappointing, lacking the charm and confidence needed to captivate an audience. Ronald's awkward performances resulted in mockery, rejection. What started as a hopeful journey toward self-expression ended up being another humiliating experience, further damaging his already delicate self-esteem. Ronald faced significant challenges in forming lasting romantic and platonic relationships. His appearance, financial difficulties, and introverted nature hindered his ability to connect with others. As he faced a series of rejections, he began to doubt his self-worth. The loneliness he felt grew into feelings of resentment and darker thoughts. His financial situation remained dire. Without a college education or specialized skills, Ronald was stuck in low-paying jobs that barely covered his living expenses. This frugal and stagnant way of life only deepened his sense of hopelessness and social isolation, which steadily took a toll on his mental well-being. Emotionally, Ronald was in a constant struggle. He desired acceptance and love but frequently encountered rejection, loneliness. Over time, the combination of social failures, poverty, and profound isolation created a volatile emotional state. Ronald's first recorded legal issue occurred in 1985 when he was arrested for making explicit harassing phone calls to several individuals in his area. The authorities traced the calls back to him. Although it was a serious matter, it was considered a minor offense at the time, and Ronald avoided jail by paying a $74 fine. Few could have anticipated that this incident would mark the beginning of a troubling pattern of behavior that would lead to more severe crimes. By August 1996, Ronald's criminal behavior escalated significantly. His second arrest marked a pivotal point in his downward spiral. That night, while driving, Ronald spotted a young man walking alone. Ronald approached him, pretending to be friendly, and offered a ride, luring him in with the promise of marijuana. Once they reached Ronald's trailer, everything changed dramatically. In a shocking act of violence, Ronald attacked the young man, tying him up with an extension cord to limit his movement. Ronald then abused him, ignoring the victim's desperate attempts to fight back. During the assault, Ronald showed a violent and aggressive side that was hidden from the public, in stark contrast to his usual polite demeanor. However, in a moment of luck, the victim managed to partially free himself. Despite being naked and still tied up, he made a bold escape by jumping through a trailer window and running into the night. His screams for help echoed through the darkness, drawing the attention of nearby residents. The scene was chaotic. A disheveled man, partially tied up, was running through the streets with Ronald chasing him, trying to stop him from escaping. Neighbors came out of their homes to see what was happening, but most decided not to get involved, thinking it was just a domestic argument or a misunderstanding. Ronald was known as a quiet, respectful neighbor, which made people less suspicious of him. In the end, the young man found someone who could help and reported the incident to the police, providing them with a detailed account of the abduction and assault, naming Ronald as his attacker. Ronald was arrested within days on charges of aggravated abuse and kidnapping. His bail was set at $100,000, which he could not pay, so he stayed in jail while waiting for his trial. The 2 to 3 months he spent in jail were traumatic, leaving him vulnerable and anxious, him a target for severe abuse from other inmates. The attacks were so brutal that he needed hospitalization and surgery. This experience caused him deep psychological scars and a crippling fear of returning to prison. While incarcerated, Ronald became increasingly withdrawn, trying to avoid conflict and keep a low profile to protect himself. When his court date finally came, the prosecution suffered a significant setback. The victim did not show up in court. Without the victim's testimony, the prosecutors had to drop the charges due to lack of evidence. Although it was clear that Ronald had committed a violent crime, the justice system could not proceed without the victim's presence. In 1997, Ronald's violent behavior increased significantly. His first known murder victim was 19-year-old David Mitchell, who went missing on July 13, 1997, after attending a birthday party at his grandmother's house. David, who often hitchhiked, accepted a ride from Ronald that night, a decision that led to his death. He was never seen alive again. The following day, July 14th, David's body was found in a remote drainage ditch. The intense heat and humidity of Louisiana had sped up decomposition, making the forensic investigation more difficult. However, examiners concluded that he had drowned. The lack of defensive wounds and the unusual circumstances surrounding his death indicated that there might be more to the case. 5 months later, on December 14, 1997, tragedy struck again when the body of 20-year-old Gary Pierre was discovered. The cause of death was evident: Gary had been strangled. Similarly to David, he had no defensive injuries, suggesting he was either caught off guard or overpowered. The disturbing similarities between both cases raised alarms among law enforcement. Although there was no solid evidence linking the two incidents, concerns grew that a serial killer might be involved. In the following months, Ronald continued his deadly actions, targeting mostly young men who vanished from the streets of New Orleans and nearby areas. Ronald's victims were typically teenagers and men between the ages of 16 and 46. The community grew increasingly fearful of this hidden predator. Despite rising concerns, police struggled to connect the clues. Without solid evidence, Ronald evaded detection, allowing his violent rampage to persist unnoticed. Although witnesses reported seeing some of the victims in bars and areas known for intimate services, authorities have had difficulty establishing a clear connection between these sightings and a potential suspect. The murders kept occurring. The deaths were of Oliver LeBanks, 27, of Metairie, Joseph Brown, 16, of Kenner, and Bruce Williams, 18. In June 1999, another victim, 21-year-old Angel Mejia. The killer initially tried to throw Maja's body in a trash can, but after discovering that the bin was full, he dumped Maja's on the street. After an autopsy, police investigators determined that the victim had been tied up with rope before he died. Like the previous victims, Maja had been abusively assaulted and strangled. His body showed no signs of struggle, highlighting the calculated nature of the killer. With each new victim, police became more convinced they were up against a highly organized serial killer. Yet, despite the growing apprehension and rising number of victims, the investigation made little significant progress. The community remained in a state of fear while authorities faced an unending cycle of similar crimes without any solid leads. Ronald, who had previously shown caution, started to revert to his old, dangerous ways. After changing jobs and moving homes, he left his job and moved in with his sister. Although it seemed like he was establishing a more stable life by working as a laborer, he still posed a significant threat to the community. In late 2002, Dominique and his sister moved to the unincorporated rural community of Bayou Blue. There, he found work as a power level tester at a local power supply, allowing him to travel periodically. Around this time, Dominique killed 19-year-old Datrell Woods, dumping both him and his bicycle in a reed field. Woods' partially nude and decomposed body was not discovered until May 24, 2003. The cause of death was ruled as asphyxiation, the death being ruled an accident, as the victim was known to have asthma. His next victims were Larry Matthews, 46, his first white victim, Michael Barnett, 21, and Leon Lirette, 22, who had previously lived with two other victims, Barnett and Anoka Jones. In April, Dominique met August Watkins, 31, whom he lured to his truck. After Watkins was locked in his trailer, Dominique tied him up, abused him, and strangled him. After Watkins' body was discovered, the police finally began to consider for the first time that a serial killer was operating in Kenner and Houma, as the murders in both areas showed a very similar modus operandi. The case was turned over to the FBI. A few days after killing Watkins, Dominique killed Kurt Cunningham, 23. Later that summer, he killed Alonzo Hogan, 28, in St. Charles Parish, and Wayne Smith, 17, in Terrebonne Parish. Hogan was aired by Dominique before the autopsy, while no traces of semen were found on Smith's body because his body had been dumped in a canal, where it was badly decomposed when it was discovered just days later. In September 2005, Dominique killed 40-year-old Chris DeVille, who was trying to hitchhike out of Napoleonville after Hurricane Katrina. He then dumped DeVille's body in a reed field. His remains were discovered the following month and identified by relatives, using only identification cards and other personal items left next to his body. In late November, Dominique killed 21-year-old Nicholas Pellegrin in Lafourche Parish. During the investigation into his death, Pellegrin's relatives told police that shortly before his death, the deceased man had borrowed $400 from local banned substance dealers and had fallen behind on payments, after which he began receiving death threats. As a result, before Dominique was arrested, Pellegrin's death was falsely ruled banned substance-related. Dominique's last confirmed victim was 27-year-old Christopher Sutterfield. He met Dominique in the summer of 2006, after which the two began dating. On October 14th, while on a date together in Iberville Parish, Dominique struck Sutterfield in the head with a heavy object, rendering him unconscious. After his body was found, police interviewed Sutterfield's relatives, friends, and acquaintances, all of whom confirmed that they had last seen him with a man driving a black SUV, but they were unable to describe the appearance of his companion. In November 2006, Dominique came to the attention of police after Ricky Wallace, a resident of Bayou Blue, reported that Dominique had lured him to his trailer in mid-2006 with the offer of sharing banned substance and intimate with a girl. After Wallace entered the trailer, according to his testimony, Dominique attempted to convince him that his girlfriend liked being tied up, offering to tie Wallace up. Ricky refused, and he was allowed to leave shortly thereafter. Ricky provided crucial information that helped investigators link Ronald Dominique to a series of unsolved murders. Further investigation showed that Ronald's movements coincided with the locations where multiple bodies had been discovered. As surveillance operations and background checks intensified, investigators obtained a DNA sample from Dominique. Tests connected his DNA to evidence found on one of the victims, Oliver Lobanks. Although the initial match was based on mitochondrial DNA, less conclusive than nuclear DNA, it was sufficient to justify close monitoring of him. The brutality of this crime prompted authorities to take immediate action. On December 1, 2006, Ronald Joseph Dominique was arrested. Despite his frail appearance and need for a cane, police were confident they had apprehended the man responsible for at least 23 murders. In the beginning, Dominique denied any involvement during questioning. However, as the interrogation progressed, he ultimately confessed to killing all of his known victims. He tried to portray the murders as self-defense, arguing that his victims had attacked him first. Nonetheless, he later admitted to binding and strangling each victim. Dominique described his technique. He would entice young men with promises of money or by showing a fake photo of an attractive woman, claiming he was looking for someone to engage in intimate activities with her. Once he lured them into his trailer and restrained them, they were completely under his control. In some instances, he used blunt objects like iron rods to strike his victims before strangling them. After his confession, Dominique was presented with a deal. If he fully cooperated by disclosing the locations of the victims' bodies and providing more information about the murders, prosecutors would refrain from pursuing the death penalty. Dominique agreed to this deal. He guided investigators to several sites where the bodies had been discarded, enabling authorities to gather sufficient evidence to convict him. Out of the 23 murders linked to Ronald Dominique, police were able to conclusively prove 8. After accepting a plea agreement from prosecutors, on September 24, 2008, the court found Dominique guilty on all charges and sentenced him to 8 consecutive life terms without parole. Dominique avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty to all charges and was incarcerated at the Louisiana State Prison in Angola. Some families of his victims were upset with the plea deal, wishing he had received the death penalty. However, others found some comfort knowing that Dominique would spend the rest of his life in the very environment he feared, the general prison population, where his vulnerability and past crimes made him a target. As of now, Dominique is still incarcerated, serving multiple life sentences. In 1995, 11-year-old Lacey Phillips lived with her mother, Mary, her father, James, and her older siblings. Brother Jesse, who was 15 at the time, and sister Darla, who was 17. The family was very close-knit and had a strong bond. The Phillips family lived in their own home in a small town called Bald Knob, Arkansas, which they had moved to 5 years earlier from Hope, Arkansas. They considered Bald Knob an ideal place for family life and raising children. Mary was known as a loving mother and wife, fond of gardening, outdoor recreation. The Phillips family was a typical American family, slowly building their happiness, unaware of how cruelly it would eventually be destroyed. On June 6, 1995, 11-year-old Lacey was under the supervision of her older sister, Darla. Both were students, but summer vacation had begun. Their mothers go to work during this time and often the children will stay at home waiting for their parents to return. However, at 4 p.m. that day, Lacey had an appointment with the dentist, which coincided with Mary's end of her work shift. Consequently, Darla drove Lacey to the workplace, where their mother worked as an accountant in an automated tax and accounting service. It was planned that Lacey would wait until her mother finished work and then go to the appointment together. Darla later described this outing as completely ordinary. She talked with Mary for a while, and then Darla went home, planning to meet her friends later. She and her mother said goodbye and hugged, unaware that this would be their last meeting. Although Mary and Lacey were expected to be a little late coming back from the dentist, it was merely a routine checkup that wasn't supposed to take long. Meanwhile, Jesse and Darla were left alone at home. Their father was on a business trip 500 kilometers away. The siblings expected their mother and Lacey to return by 5 p.m., but as much more time passed with no sign of mother, they began to worry. At around 6 p.m., both teenagers grew increasingly worried as neither returned from the dentist's office. Lacey is too young to have her own plans, and Mary had no other plans for the evening. Even if something had changed, Mary always called the children to inform them if she would be late. Her uncharacteristic absence without warning heightened their concern. Darla assumed her mother might be late at work, so she called the office but received no answer. Concerned, she then headed to the dental clinic, but there was no sign of Mary or Lacey. Time passed, and as the sun began to set, Darla contacted their father to share their growing worries. He suggested they leave the house and look around the area, considering that Mary's car might have broken down or she might need help. Jesse and Darla searched the vicinity but found nothing. They returned to their house and reported their findings to their father, prompting him to contact the police. A dispatch officer spoke to James to gather necessary information. He provided details about where Mary worked, the car she drove, and their trip to the dentist set for around 4 p.m. The most alarming fact was that Mary and Lacey never reached the dentist. Law enforcement took James's report seriously, confirming that no one had arrived at the dental office. Around midnight, an officer was dispatched to check Mary's workplace. Upon arrival at the parking lot in front of the building, the patrolman noticed a pickup truck parked alone. After checking the license plate, he confirmed it was indeed Mary Phillips' vehicle. This discovery intensified fears that something had gone terribly wrong. The car was intact and locked, so the officer decided to check the office where Mary worked. He knocked on the door, which surprisingly opened because it was unlocked. Upon entering, he found the lights were off and had to use a flashlight to explore. It was then that he discovered something horrifying: the body of a woman covered in blood, with her hands tightly bound behind her back. A cord from a household appliance was wrapped around her neck, and her clothes were pulled down. The officer immediately realized she had been brutally beaten. A pulse check indicated she was dead. The body was cold, suggesting she had been killed hours earlier. The office resembled the aftermath of a violent struggle, with blood scattered around, intensifying concerns that the perpetrator might still be present. The patrolman called for reinforcements and continued to carefully inspect the rooms while waiting for his colleagues to arrive. He checked the office and then moved to the utility rooms, where he noticed a trail of blood leading to another door, which was also unlocked. He entered without any problems and saw a gruesome scene. In the middle of the room was a chair to which a girl was tied, also covered in blood. There was especially a lot of blood. Her face showed clear signs of having received several blows to the head. Thought the girl was dead, he managed to take several pictures of the second victim when she suddenly woke up, opened her eyes, and looked in his direction. Later, the police officer recalled this moment as one of the most terrible and unexpected in his life, as if he had seen a dead person returning to life. The patrolman immediately turned to his colleagues and, in addition to requesting reinforcements, asked them to call for doctors. He freed the girl and tried to provide first aid, but it quickly became obvious that she was in serious condition and that only doctors could fully help her. Despite her injuries, she was conscious and could speak. She clearly stated that her name was Lacey Phillips. The only thing that worried her was her mother's condition. She asked several times what had happened to Mary and if everything was okay with her, but the policeman distracted her from these troubling thoughts, not telling her the truth. The medics arrived a few minutes later, and Lacey was urgently taken to the nearest medical facility. On the way, she regained consciousness and then lost it again. Lacey had sustained a serious head injury from several strong blows to the head with a blunt object. Additionally, marks were found on her neck indicating strangulation, and in addition to sustaining a fracture in her cranial vault, she had a broken jaw. Mary's husband, James, was notified that something had happened to his loved ones but was given no details. He immediately packed his things and left for the city to see his daughter in the hospital to support her. He was shocked and did not understand what had happened to his family. Now, the doctors did not dare to provide a prognosis on whether the Phillips' youngest daughter, Lacey, would survive. An even greater blow was the death of 34-year-old Mary. She could not be saved and had died before the patrolman arrived. Forensic experts worked at the crime scene but were unable to find any clues that would lead to the criminal. Their only hope was Lacey, who had miraculously survived the attack, and they awaited news from the medical center with excitement. A few hours later, doctors managed to stabilize Lacey's condition. The morning after the attack, on June 7th, she woke up in hospital. She was in the intensive care unit, and they were finally able to communicate. Despite her traumatic brain injury, she remembered perfectly what had happened. Later, Lacey admitted that all of it was captured in her memory. Lacey began to recount the frightening details of how her older sister had taken her to their mother's workplace at about 3 p.m. She remained in the office until 3:45 p.m., as both of them were getting ready to go to the dentist's office for a routine checkup. The workday was almost over. But a few minutes before it ended, an unfamiliar man entered the office. He immediately headed to the desk where Mary worked. She and Mary looked at him and even stepped back. There was something frightening in his gaze, but they thought he was just a client who had come into the office. When the stranger raised his hands, it became obvious that he was not there for advice. He was wearing latex gloves. In one hand, he held a roll of wire, and in the other, a gun with which he threatened Mary and Lacey. The man announced that it was a robbery. Mary tried to cover herself and protect her daughter, but he pushed Mary's aside, knocked her to the floor, and began tying her wrists behind her back with the wire. Lacey was confused, scared, and unable to react. Everything happened too quickly. After tying up Mary, the unknown man shouted at Lacey and ordered her to follow him into another room. He brought a chair from Mary's office, placed it in the middle of the room, and forced she to sit on it while he tied her hands to the chair behind her back. She cried, begged him not to harm her and her mother. The criminal said he would not harm Mary but would hurt her daughter. After securing Lacey to the chair with wire, he immediately hit her hard on the head with the handle of the pistol. Her eyes went dark, and she lost consciousness. After which, the stranger left the room, closing the door behind him. Lacey was left alone. She was tightly tied up and couldn't even move. She felt like she was bleeding from her head. Lacey regained consciousness a few minutes later, looked around, and saw that blood was all around the chair. She was in pain, but she couldn't imagine the extent of the head injury she had sustained. She began to scream and call for help, hoping that her mother would enter the room and untie her. The door swung open, and to her horror, it was the same man again. He was furious that she was still alive and screamed, striking she again before grabbing her by the neck and beginning to strangle her until she lost consciousness once more. This lasted for several minutes. Perhaps the criminal was afraid of being caught, so he wanted to escape from the building as quickly as possible. He believed he had killed Lacey, turned off the light, and left the room. The criminal immediately fled the office. Several hours passed. Lacey came to her senses but then lost consciousness again. Each time she regained consciousness, she tried to get free and call for her mother but received no response. Her hands were tightly bound with metal wire. Lacey grew weaker with every minute. The only hope for salvation was the thought that someone would find them. About 8 hours passed during which Lacey remained locked in the dark room, bleeding. She was half asleep, could barely move, and had lost all strength. Suddenly, the girl heard a faint clicking sound coming from the next room. At first, she was scared that it was the attacker, but then the sounds were repeated next to her, and flashes appeared in her half-asleep state. Lacey realized it looked like a photo shoot. She confirmed it when she opened her eyes and saw someone taking her picture. Fortunately, it was not the criminal. It was a policeman who had arrived at the office to check on Lacey. Lacey remembered how the ambulance had arrived, how the policeman freed her. She was losing and regaining consciousness on the way to the intensive care unit of the nearest children's hospital. All this time, the doctors talked to her to keep her conscious. At each moment of clarity, Lacey tried to find out what had happened to her mother, but she never received an answer to any of her questions. Even now, while talking to the police, she still did not know that Mary was dead. After the police visit to the hospital, her father, brother, and sister came into the ward. They brought balloons and soft toys. Lacey still believed that her mother, like her, was in the hospital and had probably also suffered at the hands of the attacker but was still alive. The whole day of June 7th, Lacey's relatives spent with she, but they never answered any of her questions about Mary. She saw how, with each passing moment, her father's eyes filled with tears. Doubt began to creep in, but at that time, Lacey was still too weak and simply pushed away the bad thoughts. In the evening, James gathered his strength, went up to his daughter, knelt down, and hugged her. In a trembling voice, he told her that Mary was now in heaven with her great-grandmother. The detective leading the investigation could not afford to be sentimental, as the criminal responsible for the attack was still on the loose and might strike again. The local residents were in danger, and the bloodthirsty killer had to be stopped urgently. When Lacey found out about this, she realized with horror that she was the only chance for the police to catch the criminal. She also understood that she was in great danger and that the attacker might return to eliminate her as an unwanted witness. In the office where he committed the murder and attempted murder, the stranger left no traces. He managed to avoid leaving evidence by using latex gloves, which Lacey reported. However, he left biological fluids after abusing Mary, but their examination would take time, and the research capabilities of that era were much more modest. Therefore, the results only allowed the police to limit the circle of suspects, which at that point was not substantial. The criminal was likely an experienced killer. He knew how to avoid being caught, acted covertly, and used gloves. However, the police still had the main source of information, Lacey. She remembered the attacker perfectly and provided a very detailed description, including the smallest details of his clothing, appearance. Having learned that this man had taken her mother away from her, she was determined to bring him to justice. Describing the face of the criminal, Lacey suddenly recalled one important detail. Before he struck her on the head, while he had tied her hands with metal wire, she noticed a teardrop tattoo on his face, as well as a tattoo on his arm. This detail allowed the detectives to match these distinctive features with registered criminals. Detectives quickly identified a 31-year-old man named Jack Jones, who had the tattoos described by Lacey. Jack was well known to the local police for multiple robbery charges, but investigators did not suspect that he was responsible for much more serious crimes. The police quickly discovered Jack Jones's last known residence and went to apprehend him, expecting that he might already be on the run. To their surprise, Jack personally opened the door, did not seem alarmed at all. He was immediately brought to the station for questioning. While being taken to the department, detectives contemplated what tactics to employ to get the criminal to talk. To their surprise, no tricks were needed. As soon as Jack was asked about Mary and Lacey, he calmly began to recount what had happened. He stated that he had seen Mary standing in her office early that same day while he was driving past. As soon as it happened, he decided that he wanted to kill her because he found her incredibly beautiful. He returned later, knowing that the office closed around 4 p.m., when there should have been no one there. However, he saw a girl there but did not retreat. He tied up Lacey in the room because he was not interested in her. His goal from the very beginning was Mary. He bound her hands behind her back, placed her on the floor, abused her, and then cut a cord from the kettle, wrapped it around her neck, and began to strangle her. According to Jack Jones, this murder was an act of revenge for the abuse of his wife, as her attacker remained unpunished. The investigation revealed that Jack's wife did report the crime to the police, but later she retracted her statement against the abuser, leading to his release. Jack insisted that his wife was indeed abused, but why Mary had to pay for it remained a mystery. On the evening of June 7, 1995, Jack Jones was arrested for the abuse and murder of Mary. He was also charged with the attempted murder of Lacey. When the Phillips family was informed, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, as no one could be sure that the killer wouldn't come back to eliminate the only witness. However, their fight was just beginning, as Jack still had to be brought to justice in court. Thanks to his confession, there should not be any problems. Lacey did not want to attend the hearings to avoid further trauma, but the existing evidence against him was enough to send him to prison. The trial began in April of 1996. By that time, law enforcement officials had carefully reviewed all the evidence against Jack. It was decided to show in court a recording of Lacey's account, made on a dictaphone while she was recovering from her injuries in the hospital. She quickly recovered physically, but psychologically she was broken. However, even in such a state, she wanted justice. The defense attorney tried to refute her statement, but the jury did not believe him. The defendant himself pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming that he was not himself during the attack on the mother and daughter because he was treating his bipolar disorder with illegal drugs. His arguments about a difficult childhood were also unconvincing. Ultimately, the jury found Jack Jones guilty on all counts. For the murder of Mary Phillips, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For the brutal beating of Lacey, he received a life sentence along with an additional 30 years and a fine of $15,000 for the attempted murder of Lacey. But this was not the end of Jack's criminal story. While on death row, he confessed to another murder, that of 32-year-old Lori Barrett. This incident occurred during her 5-day vacation in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where she planned to visit friends. Because she arrived late, she didn't want to bother her friend's family and decided to stay at a hotel instead. That evening, Barrett went to a local bar to relax after her trip. There, she met a young man with several tattoos. According to several witnesses who spoke to the police, Barrett was seen drinking with the stranger until about 2 a.m. in the hotel patio. After that, they went up in the elevator together, presumably to her room. The next day, she failed to show up for a planned barbecue with her friend. Later, a cleaning lady went to her room and found her body, which had been abused and strangled. Jack Jones confessed to this murder in 2005, claiming that he liked Barrett right away, and they spent the whole evening together before going up to her room. However, the details of what happened next and the reason for the attack remain unknown, as Jack refused to disclose them. For the trial related to this case, he was extradited to Florida and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, after which he was returned to Arkansas to await execution. Interestingly, Jack Jones could have been caught and convicted of this crime while it was still being committed. A composite sketch was created based on witness statements and footage from the hotel's security cameras. His sister identified him after seeing the sketch in a newspaper and showed it to their father, who insisted that she never talk about the event or show Jack's image to anyone else. She complied, remaining silent. Jack's father then put him on a bus and sent him to Arkansas to prevent anyone from recognizing him based on the composite sketch. Unfortunately, it cost Mary Phillips her life. When Jack's family was questioned about the story, they admitted that they knew their son had met with Barrett before the attack but did not believe that Jack could be involved in such a brutal crime. Consequently, the father decided not to contact the police. They described Jack as a very complex person who grew increasingly gloomy and cruel with age, taking out his anger not only on his siblings but also on his parents. However, they justified his behavior until the last moment, believing he could be loving and gentle. They did not think he was capable of murder. On April 24, 2017, 52-year-old Jack Jones was executed for the murder of Mary Phillips at the Cummins unit, along with abuser-murderer Marcel Williams, marking the first double execution in the country in 17 years. Jones and Williams were 2 of 4 inmates executed in Arkansas in April 2017, the other 2 being convicted murderers Liddell Lee and Kenneth Williams. Jones's last meal consisted of fried chicken, fries with tartar sauce, beef jerky, 3 candy bars, a chocolate milkshake, and juice. Lacey, now grown, was present at the execution. When Jack was given his last words, he turned to the victim's daughter, tenderly called her by name, and claimed that he had perceived her as his daughter all his life. Naturally, this only caused her disgust and anger. After the execution, it was revealed that Jack Jones was involved in another murder. Just before his execution, he gave his sister a letter he had written in 2006, with instructions to open it a year after his execution. She respected his request. When she finally opened the letter from her brother, she read a terrible confession. On May 2, 1983, 20-year-old Regina Harrison left her house in the evening to ride her bike. At that time, 19-year-old Jack Jones was riding his bike towards the beach. He meets Regina, who catches his eye, and secretly follows her to a deserted street, where he attacks, abuses, and kills her. They began to search for her that same evening after Regina did not return home at the appointed time. The next day, her body was found in a nearby park with signs of abuse and strangulation, which became the cause of death. During the investigation of this crime, detectives found a witness who identified the criminal as Ronald Stewart, who was passing by the park at the approximate time of the murder. In January of 1985, Ronald pleaded guilty and was then sentenced to 50 years in prison. He died behind bars of cancer in 2008. It later turned out that the only reason an innocent man took the blame was that Ronald Stewart had already committed a series of abuses of other girls. He had been convicted of those crimes and was now afraid of the death penalty, so he made a deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Ronald never denied his guilt during his lifetime, but DNA testing later showed that he was not guilty of Regina's murder. After Jack Jones' sister, Lynn, went to the police and handed over the letter confessing to the murder, DNA testing was conducted, and in February 2019, his words were officially confirmed: Jack was behind Regina's murder. Before the execution, he lost one of his legs due to diabetes. He stated that he was ready to die, and it remains unknown why he confessed to the murders of Mary and Barrett but did not do the same regarding Regina Harrison until he only mentioned it in a letter to his sister. After the execution, it became official that Jack had killed at least 3 young women. Law enforcement officials now believe that he could have been involved in more brutal crimes. Mary's widower, after Jack's death, spoke out against people who expressed support for the criminal. There were supporters of the killer who believed that he deserved a lighter sentence and demanded that the execution be cancelled. However, James said that he did not believe they would have maintained such a loyal attitude towards the criminal if he had killed their loved ones. Lacey, after talking to journalists, said that she could finally move on with her life. Justice had finally prevailed, and this dangerous criminal would no longer be able to harm anyone. However, even despite the execution, she believed that she would never be able to completely free herself from the consequences of the horror she had endured.